Chapter 21 of the Book of Life by Upton Sinclair. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 21 Diet Standards discusses various foods and their food values, the quantities we need, and their money cost. I think there is no more important single question about health than the question of how much food we should eat. It is one about which there is a great deal of controversy, even among the best authorities. We shall try here for a common sense solution. At the outset, we have to remind ourselves of the distinction we tried to draw between nature and man. To what extent can civilized man rely upon his instincts to keep him in perfect health? Let us begin by considering the animals. How is their diet problem solved? Horses and cattle in a wild state are adjusted to certain foods which they find in nature, and so long as they can find it, they have no diet problem. Man comes and takes these animals and domesticates them. He observes their habits and gives them a diet closely approaching the natural one, and they get along fairly well. But suppose the man, with his superior skill in agriculture, taking wild grain and planting it, reaping and threshing it by machinery, puts before his horse an unlimited quantity of concentrated food, such as oats, which the horse can never get in a natural state. Will that horse's instincts guide it? Not at all. Any horse will kill itself by overeating on grain. I have read somewhere a clever saying that a farm is a good place for an author to live, provided he can be persuaded not to farm it. But once upon a time I had not heard that wise remark, and I owned and tried to run a farm. I had 2 beautiful cows, of which I was very proud. And one morning I woke up and discovered that the cows had got into the pear orchard, and had been feeding on pears all night. In a few hours they both lay with bloated stomachs, dying. A farmer told me afterwards that I might have saved their lives if I had stuck a knife into their stomachs to let out the gas. I do not know whether this is true or not, but my 2 dead cows afforded a perfect illustration of the reason why civilized man cannot rely upon his instincts and his appetites to tell him when he has had enough to eat. He can only do this provided he rigidly restricts himself to the foods which he ate in the days when his teeth and stomach and bowels were being shaped by the process of natural selection. If he is going to eat any other than such strictly natural foods, he will need to apply his reason to his diet schedule. In a state of nature, man has to hunt his food, and the amount that he finds is generally limited, and requires a lot of exercise to get. Explorers in Africa give us a picture of man's life in the savage state, guided by his instincts and very little interfered with by reason. The savages will starve for long periods, then they will succeed in killing a hippopotamus or a buffalo, and they will gorge themselves, and nearly all of them will be ill, and several of them will die. So you see, even in a state of nature, and with natural foods, restraint is needed, and reason and moral sense have a part to play. What do reason and moral sense have to tell us about diet? Our bodily processes go on continuously, and we need at regular intervals a certain quantity of a number of different foods. The most elementary experiment will convince us that we can get along, maintain our body weight and our working efficiency upon a much smaller quantity of food than we naturally crave. Civilized custom puts before us a great variety of delicate and appetizing foods, upon which we are disposed to overeat, and we are slow observers indeed if we do not note the connection between this overeating and ill health. So we are forced to the conclusion that if we wish to stay well, we need to establish a censorship over our habits. We need a different diet regimen from the haphazard one which has been established for us by a combination of our instincts with the perversions of civilization. Up to a few years ago, it was commonly taken for granted by authorities on diet that what the average man actually eats must be the normal thing for him to eat. Governments which were employing men in armies and at road building, and had to feed them and keep them in health, made large-scale observations as to what men ate, and thus were established by the old-fashioned diet standards. They are expressed in calories, which is a heat unit representing the quantity of fuel required to heat a certain small quantity of water a certain number of degrees. In order that you may know what I am talking about, I will give a rough idea of the quantity of the more common foods which it takes to make 100 calories. 1 medium-sized slice of bread, a piece of lean cooked steak the size of 2 fingers, 1 large apple, 3 medium tablespoons of cooked rice or potatoes, 1 large banana, a tablespoon of raisins, 5 dates, 1 large fig, a teaspoonful of sugar, a ball of butter about the size of your thumbnail, a very large head of lettuce, 3 medium-sized tomatoes, 2/3 of a glass of milk, a tablespoon of oil. You observe, if you compare these various items, how little guidance concerning food is given by its bulk. You may eat a whole head of lettuce weighing nearly a pound, and get no more food value than from a half ounce of olive oil which you pour over it. You may eat enough lean beefsteak to cover your plate, and you will not have eaten so much as a generous helping of butter. A big bowl of strawberries will not count half so much as the cream and sugar you put over them. So you may realize that when you eat olive oil, butter, cream, and sugar, you are in the same danger as the horse eating oats, or as my 2 cows in the pear orchard. And if some day a surgeon has to come and stick a knife into you, it may be for the same reason. The old-fashioned diet standards are as follows: Swedish laborers at hard work, over 4,700 calories; Russian workmen at moderate work; German soldiers in active service; Italian laborers at moderate work, between 3,500 and 3,700 calories; English weavers, nearly 3,500 calories; Austrian farm laborers, over 5,000 calories. Some 20 years ago, the United States government made observations of over 15,000 persons, and established the following, known as the Atwater standards: men at very hard muscular work, 5,500 calories; men at moderately active muscular work, 3,400 calories; men at light to moderate muscular work, 3,050 calories; men at sedentary, or women at moderately active work, 2,700 calories. In the last 10 or 15 years, there has arisen a new school of dietetic experts, headed by Professors Chittenden and Fisher of Yale University. Professor Chittenden has published an elaborate book, The Nutrition of Man, in which he tells of long-continued experiment upon a squad of soldiers and a group of athletes at Yale University, also upon average students and professors. He has proved conclusively that all these various groups have been able to maintain full body weight and full working efficiency upon less than half the quantity of protein food hitherto specified, and upon anywhere from 1/2 to 2/3 the calorie value set forth in former standards. When I first read this book, I set to work to try its theories upon myself. During the 5 or 6 months that I lived on raw food, I took the trouble to weigh everything that I ate, and to keep a record. It is, of course, very easy to weigh raw foods exactly, and I found that I lived an active life and kept physical health upon slightly less than 2,500 calories a day. I have set this as my standard, and have accustomed myself to follow it instinctively and without wasting any thought upon it. Sometimes I fall from grace, for I still crave the delightful cakes and candies and ice cream upon which I was brought up. I always pay the penalty, and know that I will not get back to my former state of health until I skip a meal or two, and give my system a chance to clean house. The average man will find the regimen set forth in this book austere and awe-inspiring. I do not wish to pose as a paragon of virtue, so perhaps I should quote a sarcastic girl cousin who remarked that when I was a boy, that the way to my heart was with a bag of ginger snaps. I live in the presence of candy stores, and never think of their existence. But if someone brings candy into the house and puts it in front of me, I have to waste a lot of moral energy in letting it alone. A few years ago, I had a young man as a secretary who discovered this failing of mine, and used to afford himself immense glee by buying a box of chocolates and leaving it on top of my desk. I would give him back the box, with some of the chocolates missing, but he would persist in forgetting it on my desk. He would hide and laugh hilariously behind the door until my wife discovered his nefarious doings and warned me of them. Professor Chittenden states quite simply the common sense procedure in the matter of food quantity. Find out by practical experiment what is the very least food upon which you can do your work without losing weight. That is the correct quantity for you. And if you are eating more, you certainly cannot be doing your body any good, and all the evidence indicates that you are doing it harm. You need not have the least fear in making this experiment that you will starve yourself. Later on, in a chapter on fasting, I shall prove to you that you carry around with you in your body sufficient reserve of food to keep you alive for 80 or 90 days. And if you draw in a small quantity of this, you do not do yourself the slightest harm. Cut down the amount of your food. Eat the bulky foods which contain less calorie value, and weigh yourself every day, and you will be surprised to discover how much less you need to eat than you have been accustomed to. One of the things you will find out is that your stomach is easily fooled. It is largely guided by bulk. If you eat a meal consisting of a moderate quantity of lean meat, a very little bread, a heaping dish of turnip greens, and a big slice of watermelon, you will feel fully satisfied. Yet you will not have taken in 1/3 the calorie value that you would at an ordinary meal with gravies and dressings and dessert. The bulky kind of food is that for which your system was adapted in the days when it was shaped by nature. You have a large stomach, many times as large as you would have had if you had lived on refined and concentrated foods such as butter, sugar, olive oil, cheese, and eggs. You have a long intestinal tract, adapted to slowly digesting foods and to the work of extracting nutrition from a mass of roughage. You have a very large lower bowel, which Metchnikoff, the Russian scientist, one of the greatest minds who ever examined the problems of health, declares a survival, a relic of a previous stage of evolution, and a source of much disease. The best thing you can do with that lower bowel is to give it lots of hay, as it requires. In other words, to eat the salads and greens which contain cellulose material. This contains no food value, and does not ferment, but fills the lower bowel and stimulates it to activity. If you eat too much food, 3 things may happen. First, it may not be digested, and in that case it will fill your system with poisons. Second, it may be assimilated, but not burned up by the body. In that case, it has to be thrown out by the kidneys or the sweat glands, and this puts upon these organs an extra strain, to which in the long run they may be unequal. Or third, the surplus material may be stored up as fat. This is an old-time trick which nature invented to tide you over the times when food was scarce. If you were a bear, you would naturally want to eat all you could and be as fat as possible in November, so that you might be able to hunt your prey when you came out from your winter sleep in April. But you are not a bear, and you expect to eat your regular meals all winter. You have established a system of civilization which makes you certain of your food, and the place where you keep your surplus is in the bank, or sewed up in the mattress, or hidden in your stocking. In other words, a civilized man saves money, and the habit of storing globules of grease in the cells of his body is a survival of an old instinct and a needless strain upon his health. Not merely does the fat man have to carry all the extra weight around with him, but his body has to keep it and tend it. And what are the effects of this is fully shown by life insurance tables. People who are 5 or 10% overweight have 5 or 10% more chance of dying all the time, while people who are 5 or 10% underweight have 5 or 10% more than the average of life expectation. There is no answer to these figures, which are the result of the tabulation of many hundreds of thousands of cases. The meaning of them to the fat person is to put himself on a diet of lean meat, green vegetables, and fresh fruits, until he has brought himself down, not merely to the normal fatness of the civilized man, but to the normal leanness of the athlete, the soldier on campaign, the student who has more important things to think about than stuffing his stomach. There is, of course, a certain kind of leanness which is the result of ill health. There are wasting diseases, tuberculosis, for example, and anemia. There are people who worry themselves thin, and there are a few rare spiritual people, so-called, who fade away from lack of sufficient interest in their bodies. That is not the kind of leanness I mean, but the active, wiry leanness which sometimes lives 100 years. Nearly always you will find that such people are spare eaters, and you will find that our ideal of rosy plumpness, both for adults and children, is a wholly false notion. We once had in our home as servant an Irish girl who was what is popularly called a picture of health, with those beautiful flaming cheeks that Irish and English women so often have. She was in her early 20s, and nobody who knew her had any idea but that her health was perfect. But one morning she was discovered in bed with one side paralyzed, and in a couple of weeks she was dead with erysipelas. The color in her cheeks had been nothing but diseased blood vessels, overloaded with food material, and with the blood in that condition, one of those tiny vessels in the brain had become clogged. In the same way, I have seen children, 2 or 3 years old, plump and rosy, and considered to be everything that children should be, but pneumonia would hit them, and in 2 or 3 days they would be at death's door. I do not mean that children should be kept hungry. On the contrary, they should have 4 or 5 meals a day, so that they do not have a chance to become too hungry. But at those meals they should eat in great part bulky foods which contain the natural salts needed for building the body. If a child asks for food, you may give it an apple, or you may give it a slice of bread and butter with sugar on it. The child will be equally well content in either case, but it is for you, with your knowledge of food values, to realize that the bread with butter and sugar contains 2 or 3 times as much nutriment as the apple, but contains practically none of the precious organic salts which will make the child's bones and teeth. So far, I have discussed the subject as if all foods grew on bushes outside your kitchen door, and all you had to do was go out and pick off what you wanted. But, as a matter of fact, foods cost money, And under our present system of wage slavery, the amount of money the average person can spend for food is strictly limited. In a later book, I'm going to discuss the problem of poverty, its causes and remedies. All that I can do here is to tell you what foods you ought to have, and if society does not pay you enough for your work to enable you to buy such foods, you may know that society is starving you, and you may get busy to demand your rights as human beings. Meantime, however, such money as you do have, you want to spend wisely, and the vast majority of you spend it very unwisely indeed. In the first place, a great many of the simplest and most wholesome foods are cheap, often because people do not know enough to value them. We insist upon having the choice cuts of meat because they are more tender to the teeth, but the cheaper cuts are exactly as nutritious. We insist upon having our meats loaded with fat, although fatness is an abnormal condition in an animal, and excessive fat is a grave error in diet. I live in a country where jackrabbits are a pest, and in the market they sell for perhaps 1/4 the cost of beef. And yet I can hardly ever get them because people value them so little as food. They prefer the meat of a hog which has been wallowing in a filthy pen and has been deliberately made so fat that it could hardly walk. I have already spoken of prunes, a much despised and invaluable food. All the dried fruits are rich in food values, and if we could get them untreated by chemicals, they would be worth their cost. I was brought up to despise the cheaper vegetables, such as cabbage and turnips. I never tasted boiled cabbage until I was 40, and then to my great surprise I made the discovery that it is good. Raw cabbage is as valuable as any other salad. It is a trifle harder to digest for some people, but I do not believe in pampering the stomach. Both potatoes and rice are cheap and wholesome, if only we would get unpolished rice, and if we would leave the skins on the potatoes until after they are cooked. Nearly all the mineral salts of the potato are just under the outer skin, and are removed by the foolish habit of peeling them. The prices of food differ so widely at different seasons and in different parts of the world that there is not much profit in trying to figure how cheaply a person can live. I have found that I spend for the diet I have indicated here from 60 to 80 cents a day. I do not buy any fancy foods, but on the other hand, I do not especially try to economize. I buy what I want of the simple everyday foods in their season. Most everyone will find that it is a good business proposition to buy the foods which he needs to keep in health. If the average working man would add up the money he spends, and not merely in the restaurants, but in the candy stores, the drug stores, the tobacco stores, and the offices of doctors and dentists, he would find, I think, that he could afford to buy himself the necessary quantity of wholesome natural foods. For a family of 3, in the place where I live, enough of these foods can be purchased for $1 a day, and this is about 1/4 of what common labor is being paid, and 1/8 of what skilled labor is being paid. I will specify the foods: 1.5 pounds of shoulder steak, a loaf of whole wheat bread, or a box of shredded wheat biscuit, a head of cabbage, a pound of prunes, and 4 or 5 pounds of apples. There are many ways of saving in the purchase of food if you put your mind upon it. If you are buying prunes, you may pay as high as 50 cents or $1 a pound for the big ones, and they are not a bit better than the tiny ones, which you can buy for as low as 8 cents a pound in bulk. When bread is stale, the bakers sell it for half price, despite the fact that only then has it become fit to eat. If you buy canned peaches, you will pay a fancy price for them, and they will be heavy with cane sugar. But if you inquire, you find what are known as pie peaches, put up in gallon tins without sugar and at about half the price. The butcher will sell you what he calls Hamburg steak at a very low price, and if you let him prepare it out of your sight, he will fill it with fat and gristle. But let him make some while you watch, and then you will have a very good food. One of my diet rules is that I do not trust the capitalist system to fix me up any kind of mixed or ground or prepared foods. I have not eaten sausage since I saw it made in Chicago. Also, there is something to know about the cooking of foods, since it is possible to take perfectly good foods and spoil them by bad cooking. Once upon a time, our family discovered a fireless cooker, and thought that was a wonderful invention for an absent-minded author and a wife who is given to revising manuscripts. But recent investigations which have been made into the nature of the vitamins, food ferments which are only partly understood, suggest that prolonged cooking of food may be a great mistake. The starch has to be cooked in order to break the cell walls by the expansion of the material inside. 20 minutes will be enough in the case of everything except beans, which need to be cooked 4 or 5 hours. Meat should be eaten rare, except in the case of pork, which harbors a parasite dangerous to the human body. Therefore, pork should always be thoroughly cooked. The white of eggs is made less digestible by boiling hard or frying. Eggs should never be allowed to boil. Put them on in cold water and take them off as soon as the water begins to boil. It is not necessary to cook either fresh fruit or dried. The dried fruits may be soaked and eaten raw, but I find that several fruits, especially apples and pears, do not agree with me well if they are eaten raw, so I stew them for 15 or 20 minutes. I have no objection to canned fruits and vegetables, provided one takes the trouble in opening them to make sure there is no sign of spoiling. If you put up your own fruits, do not put in any sugar. All you have to do is let them boil for a few minutes, and to seal them tightly while they are boiling hot. The whole secret of preserving is to exclude the air with its bacteria. If you live on a farm, you will have no trouble in following the diet here outlined, for you can produce for yourselves all the foods that I have recommended. Only do not make the mistake of shipping out your best foods and taking back the products of a factory just because you have read lying advertisements about them. Take your own wheat and oats and corn to the mill, and have it ground whole, and make your own breads and cereals. Try the experiment of mixing whole cornmeal with water and a little salt, and baking it into hard, crisp corn dodgers. I do not eat these, but only because I cannot buy them and have no time to make them. Another common article of food which I do not recommend is salted and smoked meats. I do not pretend to know the effects of large quantities of salt and saltpeter and wood smoke upon the human system, but I know that Dr. Wiley's Poison Squad proved definitely that a number of these inorganic minerals are injurious to health, and I prefer to take fresh meat when I can get it. I use a moderate quantity of common salt on meat and potatoes because there seems to be a natural craving for this. I know that many health enthusiasts insist that I am thus putting a strain on my kidneys, but I will wait until these health enthusiasts make clear to me why deer and cattle and horses in a wild state will travel many miles to a salt lick. I have learned that it is easy to make plausible statements about health, but not so easy to prove them. For example, I was told that it is injurious to drink water at meals, and for years I religiously avoided the habit. But it occurred to some college professor to find out if this was really true, and he carried on a series of experiments which prove that the stomach works better when its contents are diluted. The only point about drinking at meals is that you should not use the liquid to wash down your food without chewing it. I can suggest 2 other ways by which you may save money on food. One is by not eating too much, and another is by eating all that you buy. The amount of food that is wasted by the people of America would feed the people of any European nation. The amount of food that is thrown out from any of our big American leisure class hotels would feed the children of a European town. I think it may fairly be described as a crime to throw into the garbage pail food which might nourish human life. In our family, we have no garbage pail. What little waste there is, we burn in the stove, and my wife turns into roses. It consists of the fat, which we cannot help getting at the butcher's, and the bones of meat, and the skins of some fruits and vegetables. It would never enter into our minds to throw out a particle of bread, or meat, or other wholesome food. If we have something that we fear may spoil, we do not throw it out. We put it into a saucepan and cook it for a few minutes. If you will make the same rule in your home, you will stop at least that much of the waste of American life. And as to the big leisure class hotels and the banquet tables of the rich, just wait a few years, and I think the social revolution will attend to them. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of the Book of Life by Upton Sinclair. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 22, Foods and Poisons, concludes the subject of diet and discusses the effect upon the system of stimulants and narcotics. A few years ago there died an old gentleman who had devoted some 20 years of his life to teaching people to chew their food. Horace Fletcher was his name, and his ideas became a fad, and some people carried them to comical extremes. But Fletcher made a real discovery, what he called the food filter. This is the automatic action of the swallowing apparatus, whereby nature selects the food which has been sufficiently prepared for digestion. If you chew a mouthful of food without ever performing the act of swallowing, you will find that the food gradually disappears. What happens is that all of it, which has been reduced to a thin paste, will slip unnoticed down your throat, and you may go on putting more food into your mouth and chewing, and you can eat a whole meal without ever performing the act of swallowing. Fletcher claimed that this is the proper way to eat, and that you can train yourself to follow this method. I have tried his idea and adopted it. One of my diet rules, to which there is no exception, is that if I haven't the time to chew my food properly, I haven't the time to eat. I skip that meal. The habit of bolting food is a source of disease. To be sure, the carnivorous animals bolt their food, but they are tougher than we are, and do not carry the burden of a large brain and a complex nervous system. If you swallow your meals half chewed and wash them down with liquids, you may get away with it for a while, but some day you will pay for it with dyspepsia and nervous troubles. And the same thing applies to your habit of jumping up from meals and rushing away to work, whether it be work of the muscles or of brain and nerves. Proper digestion requires the presence of a quantity of blood in the walls of the stomach and digestive tract. It requires the attention of your subconscious mind, and this means rest of your muscles and brain centers. If you cannot rest for an hour after meals, omit that meal, or make it a light one, of fruit juices, which are almost immediately absorbed by the stomach, and of salads which do not ferment. You may rest assured that it will not hurt you to skip a meal, and make up for it when you have time to be quiet. I have been many times in my life under very intense and long continued nervous strain. For example, during the Colorado coal strike, I led a public demonstration which kept me in a state of excitement all the day and a good part of the night several weeks. During this period I ate almost nothing. A baked apple and a cup of custard would be as near as I would go to a meal. And as a result I came through the experience without any injury whatever to my health. I lost perhaps 10 pounds in weight, but that was quickly made up when I settled back into a normal way of life. I have been on camping trips when I had a great deal of hard work to do, carrying a canoe long distances on my back or paddling at 40 miles a day. On the mornings of such a trip, I have seen a guide cook himself an elaborate breakfast of freshly baked bread, bacon, and even beans, and make a hearty meal, and then go straight to work. My meal, on the contrary, would consist of a small dish of stewed prunes, or perhaps some huckleberries or raspberries, if they could be found. I will not say that I could do as much as the guide, because he was used to it, and I was not. But I can say this: if I had eaten his breakfast at the start of the day, I would have been dead before night. And I mean the word dead, quite literally. I know a man who started to climb Whiteface Mountain in the Adirondacks. He climbed halfway and then ate lunch, which consisted of 9 hard-boiled eggs. Then he started to climb the rest of the mountain, and dropped dead of acute indigestion. There are few poisons which can affect the system more quickly or more dangerously than a mass of food which is not digested. The stomach is an ideal forcing house for the breeding of bacteria. It provides warmth and moisture, and you, in your meal, provide the bacteria and the material upon which they thrive. Under normal conditions, the stomach pours out a gastric juice which kills the bacteria. But let this gastric juice for any reason be lacking, because your nervous energy has gone somewhere else, or because your bloodstream, from which the gastric juice must be made, has been drawn away to the muscles by hard labor, then you have a yeast pot with great quantities of gases and poisons. In acute cases, the results are evident enough: violent pains and convulsions, followed by coma and the turning black of the body. But what you should understand is that you may produce a milder case of such poisoning, and may do it day after day habitually, and little by little your vital organs will be weakened by the strain. It does not make any difference at what hour of the 24 you take the great bulk of your food. It is one of the commonest delusions that you get some strengthening effect from your food immediately, and must have this strength in order to do hard work. To be sure, there are substances, such as grape sugar, which require practically no digesting. You can hold them in the mouth, and they will be digested by the saliva and absorbed at once into the bloodstream. But unless you have been starved for a long period, you do not need to get your strength in this rush fashion. If you ate your normal meals on the previous day, your bloodstream is fully supplied with nutriment which has been put through a long process of preparation, and you can get up in the morning and work all day, if necessary, upon what is already in your system. To be sure, you may feel hungry and even faint, but that is merely a matter of habit. Your system is accustomed to taking food and expects it. But if you are a laborer doing hard work, you can easily train yourself to eat a light meal in the morning and another light meal at noon, and to eat a hearty meal when your work is done and you can rest. 2 light meals and a hearty meal are all that any person needs, and you can prove it to yourself by trying it and watching your weight once a week. I have tried many experiments, and the conclusion to which I have come is that there is no virtue in any particular meal hours or any particular number of meals. For several years I tried the experiment of 2 meals a day. I was living a retired life and had little contact with the world, and I would make it a hearty meal at 10 o'clock in the morning and another at 5 in the afternoon. But later on I found that inconvenient, and now I take a light breakfast and 2 moderate-sized meals at the conventional hours of lunch and dinner. I can arrange my own time, so after meal times is when I get my reading done. Sometimes, when I am tired, I feel sleepy after meals, but I have learned not to yield to this impulse. I do not know how to explain this. I have observed that animals sleep after eating, and it appears to be a natural thing to do. But I know that if I go to sleep after a meal, nature makes clear to me that I have made a mistake, and I do not repeat it. I never eat at night, and always go to bed on an empty stomach, so I am always hungry when I open my eyes in the morning. I never know what it is not to be hungry at meal times, and my habits are so regular that I could set my watch by my stomach. Another common habit which is harmful is eating between meals. I have known people who are accustomed to nibble at food nearly all the time. Shelley records that he tried it as an experiment, thinking it might be a convenient way to get digestion done. But he found that it did not work. The stomach is apparently meant to work in pulses, to do a job of digesting, and then to rest and accumulate the juices for another job. It will accustom itself to a certain regime, and will work accordingly. But if, when it has half digested a load of food, you pile more food in on top, you make as much trouble as you would make in your kitchen if you required your cook to prepare another meal before she has cleaned up after the last one. 3 times a day is enough for any adult to eat. Children require to eat oftener because their bodies are more active, and they not merely have to keep up weight, but to add to it. The simplest way to arrange matters with children is to give them 3 good meals at the hours when adults eat, and then to give them a couple of pieces of fruit between breakfast and lunch, and again between lunch and supper. I have never seen a child who would not be satisfied with this, when once the habit was established. I have already spoken of the cooking and serving of food. I consider that the gastronomic art, as it is pompously called, is 99% plain rubbish. To be sure, if foods are appetizingly prepared and look good and smell good and taste good, they will cause the gastric juices to flow abundantly, as the Russian scientist Pavlov has demonstrated by practical experiment with the stomach pump. But I know without any stomach pump that the best thing to make my gastric juices flow is hard work and a spare diet. When I come home from 5 sets of tennis and have a cold shower and a rub down, my gastric juices will flow for a piece of cold beefsteak and a cold sweet potato quite as well as for anything that is served by a leisure class chef. Needless to say, I want food to be fresh and I want it to be clean, but I have other things to do with my time and money than to pamper my appetites and encourage food whims. If you have a grandmother, or ever had one, you know what grandmothers tell you about hot, nourishing food. But I have tried the experiment and satisfied myself that there is absolutely no difference in nourishing qualities between hot food and cold food. If you chew your food sufficiently, it will all be 98 6/10 degree food when it gets to your stomach, and that is the way your stomach wants it. Of course, if you have been out in a blizzard and are chilled and want to restore the body temperature, a hot drink will be one of the quickest ways. And if the emergency is extreme, you may even add a stimulant. On the other hand, if you are suffering from heat, it is sensible to cool your body by a cold drink. But you should use as much judgment with yourself as you do with a horse, which you would not permit to drink a lot of cold water when he is heated up and is going into his stall to stand still. I have mentioned the word stimulants, and this opens a large subject. There are drugs which affect the body in 2 different ways. Some excite the nerves, and through the nerves the heart and bloodstream, to more intense activity. Others have the effect of deadening the nerves and dulling the sense of exhaustion and pain. One of these groups is called stimulants, the other is called narcotics. But as a matter of fact, the stimulants are really narcotics, because they operate by dulling the nerves whose function it is to prevent the overaccumulation of fatigue poisons. In other words, they keep the nerves and muscles from knowing that they are tired, so they go on working. It is possible, of course, to conceive of an emergency in which that is necessary. Once upon a time, on a hunting trip, I had been traveling all day and was caught in a rainstorm, and exhausted and chilled to the bone. I had to make camp without a fire, so when I got the tent up, I wrapped myself in blankets and drank a couple of tablespoons full of whiskey. That is the only time I have ever taken whiskey in my life, and it warmed me almost instantly, and did me no harm. In the same way, there were 2 or 3 occasions when I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, could not sleep, and let the doctor give me a sleeping powder. But in each case I knew that I was fooling with a dangerous habit, and I did no more fooling than necessary. No one should make use of either stimulants or narcotics except in extreme emergency, and never but a few times in a lifetime. What you should do is to change your habits so that you will not need to overstrain. All these drugs are habit forming. That is to say, they leave the body no better and with a craving for repetition of the relief. When you are tired, it is because your muscles and nerves are storing up fatigue poisons more rapidly than your bloodstream can get rid of them. You need to know about this condition, and exhaustion and pain are nature's protective warning. If you put a stop to the warning, you are as unintelligent as the Eastern despots who used to cut off the head of the messenger who brought bad tidings. If, when you have a headache, you go to the drugstore and let the druggist mix you one of those white fizzy drinks, what you are doing is not to get rid of the poisons in your bloodstream, but merely to reduce the action of your heart so as to keep the blood from pressing so fast into the aching blood vessels and nerves. You may try that trick with your heart a number of times, but sooner or later you will try it once too often, and your heart will stop a little bit quicker than you meant it to. Drugs are poisons, and their action depends upon their poisoning some particular portion of the body and temporarily paralyzing it. And bear this in mind, they are nonetheless poisonous because they are natural products. You can kill yourself by cyanide of potassium, which comes out of a chemist's retort, or you can kill yourself just as dead with laudanum, which comes out of a plant, or with the contents of the venom sac of a snake. You are poisoning yourself nonetheless certainly if you use alcohol, which is made from the juices of beautiful fruits, and has had hosts of famous poets writing songs about it, or you can poison yourself with the caffeine, which you get in a lovely brown bean which comes from Brazil, fragrant to the nostrils and delicious to the taste. You may drink wine and tea and coffee for 100 years, and have your picture published in the newspapers as a proof that these habits conduce to health. But nothing will be said about the large number of people who practice these habits and didn't live so long, and about how long they might have lived if they hadn't practiced these habits. I was brought up in the South, and my elders belonged to a generation which had grown up in wartime. For this reason, many of the men both drank and smoked to excess. And in my boyhood, I lived among them and watched them, and with the help of advice from a wise mother, I conceived a horror of every kind of stimulant. The alcoholic poets could not fool me. I had been in the alcoholic wards of hospitals. I had seen one man after another, beautiful and kindly and gracious men, dragged down into a pit of torment and shame. Alcohol is, I think, the greatest trap that nature ever set for the feet of the human race. It is responsible for more degradation and misery than any other evil in the world. And I say this, knowing well that my socialist friends will cry, "What about capitalism?" My answer is that I doubt if there ever would have been any capitalism in the world, if it had not been for alcohol. If the workers had not been systematically poisoned and all their savings taken away from them by the gin mill, they would never have submitted to the capitalist system. They would have built the cooperative commonwealth at the time they were building the first factories. I listen to the arguments of my radical friends about personal liberty, but I note that in Russia, when it was a question of making a practical revolution and keeping it alive, the first thing the leaders did was to drag out the contents of the wine cellars of the palaces and smash them in the gutters. Tea and coffee are, of course, much milder in their effects than alcohol. You can play with them longer, and the punishment will be less severe. But if you make habitual use of them, you will pay the penalty which all drugs exact from the system. Your brain and your nerve centers will be less sensitive, less capable of working except under the influence of drugs. Their reacting power will be dulled, and they will wear out more quickly. I have watched the slaves of the morning cup of coffee, and know how they suffer when they do not get it. Likewise, I have watched the tea drinkers. It is comical to live in England and see all the able-bodied men obliged to leave their work at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and seek the regular stimulus for their tired nerves. If you are to meet anybody, it is always for tea that the ceremony is set, and if you refuse to drink tea, your hostess will be uncomfortable, unable to talk about anything but the strange, incredible notion that one can live without tea. I discovered after a while the solution of this problem. I would say that I preferred a little hot water, if you please, and so my hostess would pour me a cup of hot water, and I would sit and gravely sip it, and everybody would be perfectly content. I was conforming to the outward appearance of normality, which is what the British conventions require. I have never drunk a cup of coffee, so I do not know what its effect on me would be. But some 15 years ago I drank a glass of very weak iced tea at 8 o'clock in the evening, and did not get to sleep until 4 or 5 the next morning. So I know that there is really a drug in tea. I know also that I might accustom my system to it, just as I might learn to poison my lungs with nicotine, without being made immediately and suddenly ill. But why should I wish to do this? Life is so interesting to me that I do not need to stimulate my brain centers in order to appreciate the thrill of it. And when I am tired, I can rest myself by listening to music or by reading a worthwhile novel, things which I have found do not leave the after effects of nicotine. I remember the first time I met Jack London. Our meeting consisted in good part of his kidding me because I was lacking in the congenial vices of the cafe. He told me how much I had missed because I had never been drunk. One ought to try the great adventure at least once. Poor Jack is gone because his kidneys gave out at 40, and nothing could seem more ungracious than to point out that I am still alive, and finding life enjoyable. Yet, in this book we are trying to find out how to live, and if there are habits which wreck and destroy a magnificent physique, and bring a great genius to death at the age of 40, surely the rest of us want to know about it, and to be warned in time. I mention Jack London in this connection because he has said the last word on the subject of alcohol. Read John Barleycorn, and especially read between the lines of it, and you will not need my argument to persuade you to be glad that the 18th Amendment has been written into the Constitution, and that it is your duty as a socialist not merely to obey it, but to vote for its enforcement. I am proceeding on the assumption that your life is of importance to you, that you have a job to do which you know to be worthwhile, to which you desire to apply your powers. You agree with me that the workers of the world are suffering, and that it is necessary for them to find their freedom, and that this takes hard work and hard thinking. You may say that I exaggerate the amount of harm that is done to the system by tea and coffee, alcohol and tobacco. Well, let us assume that in moderate quantities they do no harm at all. Even so, I have the right to ask you to show that they do some good. Otherwise, surely it is a mistake for the workers to spend their savings upon them. Consider, for example, the amount of money which the wage slaves of the world spend upon tobacco. Suppose they could be persuaded for 2 or 3 years to spend this amount upon good reading matter. Do you not think there would be an improvement in their condition? Surely you cannot maintain that the use of tobacco is necessary to the activities of the brain. Surely you do not think that a man has to have a cigarette in order to stimulate his thoughts, or to smoke a pipe to rest himself after his work is done. I offer myself as evidence in such a controversy. I have written as many books as any man in the radical movement, and the sum total of my lifetime smoking amounts to 1/2 of one cigarette. I tried that when I was 8 years old, and somebody told me a policeman would arrest me if he caught me, and I threw away the cigarette, and ran and hid in the alley, and have not yet got over my scare. In the Journal for Industrial Hygiene for October 1920 is an article entitled "Fatigue and Efficiency of Smokers in a Strenuous Mental Occupation." Experiments were conducted among telegraph operators, and the results showed that the heavy smokers of the group showed a higher output rate at the beginning of the day than the light smokers, but their rate falls off more markedly in the late hours, and their production for the whole day is definitely less than that of the light smokers. The heavy smokers also show less ability than the light smokers to respond to increasing pressures of work in the late hours of the day by handling their full share of the work presented. One point upon which every medical authority agrees is that the use of nicotine is of deadly effect upon the immature organism. Half-grown youths who smoke cigarettes will never be full-sized men. They will never have normal lungs or a normal heart. And likewise, all authorities agree about the effect of smoking upon the organism of women. I gave what little help I could to the task of helping to set women free and to make them the equals of men. But I was always pained when I discovered that some of my feminist friends understood by women's emancipation no more than her right to adopt men's vices. I would say to these ardent young female radicals who cultivate the art of dangling a cigarette from their lower lip and sip cocktails out of coffee cups in Greenwich Village cafes, that they will never be able to bear sound children. But I know that this would not interest them. They don't want to bear any children at all. So I say that they will never be able to think straight thoughts, and will be nervous invalids when they are 30. We went to war to make the world safe for democracy, and we put several millions of our young men into armies, and if there were any of them who did not already know how to smoke cigarettes, they learned it under official sanction. So now we have a national tobacco bill that runs up to $2 billion, and will ensure us a new generation of Class C rating. Speaking to the young radicals who are reading my books, I say we want to make the world over, to make it a place of freedom and kindness instead of the hell of greed and hate that it is today. For that purpose, we need a new moral code, and we can never win our victory without it. I have attended radical conventions, sitting in unventilated halls amid clouds of tobacco smoke, and listening to men wrangle all through the day and a great part of the night. I have watched the fatal dissensions in the movement, the quarrelings of the right wingers and the left wingers, and all stages and all degrees in between, and I have wondered, not jestingly, but in pitying earnest, how much of all those personalities and factional misunderstanding had their origin in carbon dioxide and nicotine. There is no use suggesting such ideas to the older men, whose habits are fixed, but a new generation is coming on, with a new vision of the enormous task before it. And is it too much to expect of these young men and women that they shall realize in advance the grim tasks they have to do, and shall learn to run the machine of their bodies so as to get out of it the maximum amount of service? Is it too much to hope for that some day we shall have a race of young fighters for truth and justice, who are willing to live abstemious lives and consecrate themselves to the task of delivering mankind from wage slavery and war? End of chapter 22. Chapters 23 and 24 of the Book of Life by Upton Sinclair. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 23, More About Health, discusses the subjects of breathing and ventilation, clothing, bathing, and sleep. In discussing the question of health, we have given the greater part of the space to the subject of diet, for the reason that experience has convinced us that diet is two-thirds of health, and that nearly always in disease you find errors of diet playing a part. There are, however, other important factors in health, now to be discussed. Everything of which the body makes use is taken in the form of food and drink, with the exception of one substance, the oxygen we get out of the air. Every time we draw a breath, we take in a certain amount of oxygen, and every time we expel a breath, we drive out a certain amount of a gas called carbon dioxide, which is what the body makes of the fuel it burns. The body can get along for several days without water, and for 2 or 3 months without food, but it can only get along for 2 or 3 minutes without oxygen. It should be obvious that when the body expels carbon dioxide with a slight mixture of other more poisonous gases, and sucks back what it expects will be a fresh supply of oxygen, it wants to get oxygen, and not the same gases it has just expelled, nor gases which have been expelled from the lungs of other people. In the days when primitive man lived outdoors, he did not have to think about this problem. When he breathed poison from his lungs, the moving air of nature blew it away, and the infinite vegetation of nature took the carbon dioxide and turned it back into oxygen. And even when man built himself shelters, he was not cunning enough to make them airtight. He had to leave a big hole for the smoke to get out, and smaller holes through which to get light. But now our wonderful civilization has solved these problems. We make our houses out of airtight plaster, and we have invented a substance which will admit light without admitting air. So we have the white plague of tuberculosis, and so we have the innumerable minor plagues of coughs and colds and sore throats. In the summertime, the solution of the problem is easy. Have as many doors and windows in your home as possible, and keep them open, and have nothing in your home to make dust or to retain dust. But then comes stormy and cold weather, and you have to close your doors and windows, and keep your home at a higher temperature than the air outside. How shall you do this, and at the same time get a continuous supply of fresh air? I will take the various methods of heating one by one. The problem in each case is simple and can be made clear in a sentence or two. First, the open fireplace. This is a perfect solution if you have enough fuel and do not have to worry about the waste of heat. An open fireplace draws out all the air in the room in a short time, and you do not have to bother about opening doors or windows. You may be sure that the air is getting in through some cracks, or else the fire would not burn. Second, a wood or coal or gas stove in the room, provided with a proper vent, so that all the gases of combustion are drawn up the chimney. This changes the air more slowly than an open fireplace, but it does the work fairly well. All that you have to be careful about is that your vent is sufficiently large and is working properly. If your fire does not draw, you will have smoke or coal gas in the house, and this is bad for the lungs. But worse for the lungs is a gas that you can neither see nor smell nor taste, the deadly carbon monoxide. This gas is produced by incomplete combustion, and whenever you see yellow flames from gas or coal, you are apt to have this poisonous substance. Small quantities of it are sufficient to cause violent headaches, and repeated doses of it are fatal. Men who work in garages which are not properly ventilated run this risk all the time, because carbon monoxide is one of the products of imperfect combustion in the gas engine. Next, the furnace. A furnace sends fresh, warm air into your house. The only trouble is that it takes out all the moisture, and some authorities say that this is bad for the lungs and throat. I do not know whether this is true, but all furnaces are supposed to have a water chamber to supply moisture to the air, and you should keep a pan of water on every stove or radiator in your house. Next, steam heat, which includes hot water heating. This is one of the abominations of our civilization, and one of the methods by which our race is committing suicide. There is nothing wrong about steam heat in itself. The room is warmed in a harmless way, but the trouble is it stays warm only so long as the doors and windows are kept shut. You are in an airtight box, and can be warm provided you do not mind being suffocated. The moment you open a door or a window, you have a cold draft on your feet, and if you wish to change the air entirely, you have to let out all the heat. So, of course, you never do change it entirely, but go on breathing the same air over and over, and every time you breathe it, the condition of your body is a little more reduced. The solution of this problem is not to heat the air in the room, but to use your steam coils to heat fresh air, and then drive this air, already warmed, into the room, at the same time providing a vent through which the old air can be pushed out. This is the hot air system of heating, and it requires some kind of engine or dynamo, and therefore is expensive. It has been installed in a few office buildings and theaters. One of the most perfect systems I ever inspected is in the building of the New York Stock Exchange, where the air is warmed in winter and cooled in summer, and freed from dust, and exactly the right quantity is supplied. It is a humorous commentary upon our civilization that we take perfect care of the breathing apparatus of our stock gamblers, but pay no attention to the breathing apparatus of our senators and congressmen, whose one business in life is to use their lungs. The stately old building with its white marble domes looks impressive in moving pictures and on illustrated postcards, but it has no system of ventilation whatever, and is a death trap to the poor wretches who are compelled to spend their days and sometimes their nights within its walls. This contrast is one symptom of the rise of industrial capitalism and the collapse of political democracy. We have reserved to the last a method of heating which is the worst, and can only be described as a crime against health: the use of gas and oil stoves set out in the middle of the room without a vent and discharging their fumes into the room. These stoves are simply instruments of slow death, and their manufacture should be prohibited by law. In the meantime, What you have to do is to refuse to live in a room or work in an office where such stoves are used. I have heard dealers insist that this or the other kind of gas or oil stove was so contrived as to consume all the fumes. Do not let anybody fool you with such nonsense. There has never been any form of combustion devised which consumes all the fumes. No such thing can be, because the products of combustion are not combustible. The so-called wickless blue flame stoves do burn all the oil, and a properly regulated gas stove will burn all the gas, but that simply means that it turns the oil and gas into carbon dioxide, the very substance which your lungs are working day and night to get out of your body. Moreover, there is no oil or gas stove which ever burns perfectly all the time, either because there is too much gas or insufficient air. Oil and gas stoves sometimes give a partly yellow flame. You can cause them to give a yellow flame at any time by blowing air against them, and that yellow flame means imperfect combustion and a probability of the deadly carbon monoxide. These facts are known to every chemist and to every student of hygiene, and the fact that civilized people continue to burn such oil and gas stoves in their homes and offices is simply one more proof that our civilization values human welfare and health at nothing whatever in comparison with profits. Not merely should you see that you have a continuous supply of fresh air in your home, but you should try to keep down dust in your home, and especially fine particles of lint. Once upon a time, our ancestors were unable to make houses and floors tight, so they put rugs on the floors and hung tapestries on the walls to keep out the wind. We civilized people are able to make both floors and walls absolutely tight, and yet we continue to use rugs and curtains, it being the first principle of our education that propriety requires us to continue to do the things which our ancestors did. I am unable to think of a more silly or stupid thing in the world than a rug or a curtain. But I have lived in the house with them all my life, because, alas, the ladies cannot be happy otherwise. They want their homes to be pretty, and so they continue to set dust traps, and to set themselves futile jobs of house cleaning and shopping. Not all of us are able to be out of doors as much as we ought to be, but all of us spend 7 or 8 hours out of every 24 in sleep. And this time at least we ought to spend out of doors. I understand that this is a futile advice to give to the very poor. I was poor myself for many years, and had to put all my clothes on at night in order to keep warm, and even then I could not always do it. Nevertheless, from the time I first realized the importance of ventilation, I never slept in a room with a closed window. I say, sleep outdoors if you possibly can. You do not have to be afraid of exposure, for cold will not hurt you if you keep your body in proper condition. I have slept out in a rubber blanket, with the rain beating on my head and face. I have spread a rubber blanket on a hammock in the midst of a swamp, and waked up in the morning with my hair and face soaked in cold white fog. But I never caught cold from such things. There is no harm whatever in dampness or in night air, if you are in proper condition. Of course, you may get your ears frostbitten in the middle of winter, but you can have a sleeping hood to remove that danger. The nature cure enthusiasts, who lay so much stress upon an outdoor life, also insist that the wearing of clothes is a harmful civilized custom. They urge us to take sun baths and to ventilate the skin. Now, as a matter of fact, the skin does not breathe, it merely gives out moisture, and it does not give out any less because we have clothing on us, provided the clothing is dry and clean, and will absorb the moisture. But by and by, the clothing becomes loaded with the waste substances given out by the skin, and then it will absorb no more. And if you do not change your clothing, no doubt it may have some effect upon health. But the principal evil of civilized clothing is that it binds the body and prevents the free play of the muscles, and, more important yet, stops the free circulation of the blood. I have already discussed hats, which are the principal cause of baldness. I will go to the other extremity of the body and mention tight shoes, which, strange as it may seem, cause headaches and colds. You will be able to find a few civilized men with normal feet, but you will hardly ever find a woman whose toes are not crowded together and misshapen. I have said that the human body is one organism, and that it is fed and its health maintained by the bloodstream. I say now that the circulation of blood is one thing, and if you block it in any one place, you block it everywhere. Of course, not all the bloodstream goes down into the feet, but some of it does, and if it is clogged in the feet, and the blood vessels cramped and crowded, there is a certain amount of poison kept in the system, which the system should have got rid of. Why do women wear tight shoes? Because the leisure class members of their sex have been kept in harems and used as the playthings of men. To be fragile and delicate was the thing admired by the masters of wealth, and to have small hands and feet was a sign that women belonged to this parasite class. Therefore, at all hazards, women's feet must be kept small, even at the expense of their health and happiness. And so they put themselves up on several inches of heels, which cause them to toddle around like marionettes on a stage, with all their toes crowded down into a lump. Why do men wear tight bands around their scalps, which cause their hair to drop out, and tight stiff columns around their necks, which stop the circulation of blood into their heads, and cause them to have headaches instead of ideas? The reason is that for ages the rulers of the tribe have wished to demonstrate publicly their superiority to the common herd, which does the menial tasks. In England, all gentlemen wear tall black silk bandboxes on their heads, and in America they have a choice among several varieties of round, tight boxes. All men who work in offices wear stiffly starched collars and cuffs, as a means of demonstrating their superiority to the common workers, who have to sweat at their necks. I think it is not too much to hope that when class exploitation is done away with, we shall also get rid of these class symbols, and choose our clothing because it is warm and comfortable, and not according to the perverted imbecilities of style. The skin gives out perspiration, which is greasy. Also, the skin is constantly growing, putting out layers of cells which dry up and are worn off. We need to bathe with soap to remove the grease, and we need to rub with a towel to brush away the dead cells of the skin, so that the pores may be kept open. No one is taking care of his body who does not wash and rub it once every 24 hours, and once or twice a week with warm water and soap. It is often stated that hot baths are weakening, but I have never found it so. However, I think it is a bad practice to pamper the body, which should be accustomed to the shock of cold water. The rule as to bathing, both as to temperature and time, is simple. If after the bath and rub down your body has reacted and you feel vigorous and fresh, that bath has done you good. If, on the other hand, you feel chilled and depressed, then you have been too long in the water, or its temperature was too low. Every person has to find his own rules in such matters. The only general rule is that as one grows older, the body reacts less quickly. All day, as we work and think, we store up more poisons in our cells than the body can get rid of. And the time comes when the cells are so loaded with poisons that we have to stop for a while and let our bloodstream clean house. The quantity of sleep one needs is a problem like that of cold water. Each person has to find his own rule. In general, one needs less and less sleep as one grows older. Infants sleep the greater part of the time. Growing children should sleep 10 or 11 hours. adults 7 or 8, and old people, unless they have let themselves get fat, generally do not want to sleep more than 6, and part of this in short naps. When you sleep, your bodily energies relax, and you make less heat, therefore you need extra clothing. But this clothing should never cover the mouth and nose, nor should it be so heavy as to make breathing a burden. If you are in good condition, it will do you no harm to be chilly when you sleep, except that you do not sleep so soundly. Sleeping too much is just as harmful as sleeping too little. Nature will tell you that. The important thing, as in all other problems of health, is to have something interesting to think about, some exciting work to do in the world, and then you will sleep as little as you have to. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24, Work and Play, deals with the question of exercise, both for the idle and the overworked. In discussing the important question of exercise, there is one fundamental fact to begin with, that our present civilization divides men sharply into 2 classes: those who do not get enough exercise, and those who get too much. Obviously, it would be folly to make the same recommendations to the 2 classes. I will begin with those who get too much exercise. They include a great number, probably the majority of those who do the manual work of the world. They include the farmers and the farm hands who work from dawn to sunset, and sometimes by lantern light. They include also the farmers' wives, the kitchen slaves of whom the old couplet tells, "Man's work ends from sun to sun, but woman's work is never done." I am aware that men have worked that way for countless ages, and yet the race is still surviving. But I am aware also that men wither up with rheumatism, and contract chronic diseases of the kidneys and blood vessels, consequent upon the creation of greater quantities of fatigue poisons than the body can regularly eliminate. I have very little interest in the past, and none whatever in finding fault with it. My purpose is to criticize the present for the benefit of the future, and therefore I say that modern machinery and the whole development of modern large-scale production make it absolutely unnecessary that women should have to slave all their waking hours in the kitchens, or that men should slave all day. I say it is monstrous folly that the men should work for 12-hour stretches in steel mills, and for 10 and 11 hours in factories and mines. Organized labor has adopted the slogan, 8 hours for work, 8 hours for sleep, 8 hours for play. But my slogan is 4 hours for work, 4 hours for study, 8 hours for sleep, and 8 hours for play. I know, and am prepared to demonstrate to any thinking man, that modern civilization can produce not merely all the necessities, but all the comforts of life for every man, woman, and child in the community, by the expenditure of 4 hours a day work of the adult able-bodied men and women. So to all the wage slaves of the factories and mines, the fields and kitchens, I say that too much exercise is what is the matter with you, and what you need is to get off in a quiet nook in the woods and read a good novel, not merely for a few hours, but for a few months, until you get over the effects of capitalist civilization. I know that not many of you can get away as yet, but I urge you to insist upon getting away, to fight for the chance to get away. And I will here suggest a few of the novels for you to read when you finally do get away. I choose the easy ones, which the dullest and most tired of you will love. I say, make up your mind to read these 32 books before you die, and do not let the world cheat you of the chance. Mark Twain, a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court. Charles D. Stewart, The Fugitive Blacksmith. W. Clark Russell, The Wreck of the Grosvenor. R. L. Stevenson, Treasure Island, Kidnapped. Jack London, The Sea Wolf, The Call of the Wild. Martin Eden, Joseph Conrad, Youth, H.G. Wells, The War of the Worlds, When the Sleeper Wakes, The Sea Lady, The History of Mr. Polly, The Food of the Gods, The Island of Dr. Moreau. Upton Sinclair, The Jungle, King Cole, Jimmy Higgins, 100%. Theodore Dreiser, Sister Carrie, George Moore, Esther Waters, Frank Norris, The Octopus, Brand Whitlock, The Turn of the Balance, Defoe, Robinson Crusoe, Fielding, Tom Jones, Jonathan Wild the Great, Thackeray, The Adventures of Barry Lyndon, Marmaduke Pickthall, The Adventures of Haji Baba, Blasco Ibanez, The Fruit of the Vine, Frank Harris, Montes the Matador, Frederick von Eden, The Quest, Tolstoy, Resurrection. And now for the people who do not get enough exercise. In the armies of King Cyrus, it was the law that every man was required to sweat once every 24 hours. And that is still the law for every businessman and office worker and writer of books. There is no substitute for it, and there is no health without it. I have heard Dr. Kellogg say that the modern woman sends out her health with her washing. And I have heard the leisure class ladies at the sanitarium discuss this cryptic utterance and wonder what he meant by it. I know that there is use telling leisure class ladies what exercise at their wash tub would do for their abdomens and backs. I will only tell them that unless they can find some kind of vigorous activity which keeps them in a free perspiration for an hour or two each day, they will never be really well, and will never bear children without agony and abortion. For myself, I have found that the minimum is 3 or 4 times a week. Unless I get that much hard exercise, I am soon in trouble. So my advice to the businessman is to take off his coat and collar and turn out to help his truck man. My advice to the white-collar slave is to get a part-time job and dig ditches the rest of the time. To the man who has cares which pursue him, and likewise to the ardent student and brain worker, I say that they should find not merely exercise, but play. The distinction between the two things is important. There can be play that is not exercise, for example, cards and chess, and of course there can be exercise that is not play. What you must have is something that is both play and exercise. Something that not merely causes your heart to beat fast, and your lungs to pump fast, and your sweat glands to throw out poisons from your body, but something that fully occupies your mind and gives your higher brain centers a chance to relax. Our civilization has very largely destroyed the possibility of play and the spirit of play. We civilized people no longer know what play is, and regard the desire to play as something abnormal, a form of vice. We allow children to play after school hours and on Saturdays, but for grown-up, serious-minded men and women to want to play would be almost as disreputable as for them to want to get drunk. What could be more pitiful than the spectacle of tens of thousands of men crowded into our baseball parks and amusement fields to watch other men play for them? Imagine, if you can, a crowd of people gathering in a restaurant or a theater to watch other people eat for them. Imagine yourself a man from Mars coming down to a world with so many people in want, and finding whole classes of men forbidden to do any work, under penalty of disgrace, and compelled, in order to exercise their muscles, to pull on rubber straps and lift weights and wave dumbbells and Indian clubs in the air, methods of expending their muscular energy which are respectable because they accomplish nothing. When I was a boy, I was fond of all kinds of games. I was a good tennis player, and in the country an incessant hunter and fisherman. When on the city streets we boys could not find any other game to play, We would get up on the roofs of the houses and throw clothespins and snowballs at the Dagoes working in the nearby excavations. So we had the fine game of being chased by the Dagoes, with the chance, real or imaginary, of having a knife stuck into us. But then, as I grew older and became aware of the pain and the misery of the world, I lost my interest in games, and for 10 years or so I never played. I did nothing but study and write. So my health gave way, and I had the problem of restoring it. And I spent some 20 years wrestling with this problem before I thoroughly convinced myself on the point that there can be no such thing as sound and permanent health without a certain amount of play. I don't think there is any kind of hard physical work I failed to try in the course of my experiments. I rode horseback, and took long walks, and climbed mountains, and swam, and dug gardens, and chopped down whole groves of trees, and cut them up, and carried them to the fireplace. I have done this latter work for the whole winter in the country, several hours every day, and it has done my health no good to speak of. I have been ready for a breakdown at the end of it. The reason is that all the time I was doing these things with my body, I was going right on working my brain. While I was swimming, or climbing a mountain, or galloping on horseback, I was absorbed in the next chapter of the book I was writing, so that I literally did not know where I was. I would make up my mind that I would not think about my work, and I would make desperate efforts not to do so, but it was like walking along the edge of a slippery ditch. Sooner or later I was bound to fall in and go floundering along, unable to get out again. And the same thing applies to all gymnastic work. I have experimented with a dozen different systems of exercises, and with all kinds of water treatments. I have used dumbbells and Indian clubs and Swedish gymnastics, McFadden's exercises in bed, and the yogi breathing exercises, and more kinds of queer things than I can remember now. But for me, there is only one solution of the problem, which is to have an antagonist. It may be a deer I'm trying to shoot, or some trout I'm trying to lure out of their holes. It may be some boys I'm trying to beat at football or hockey, or it may be the game I know best and find most convenient, which is tennis. If it is tennis, then it has to be someone who can make me work as hard as I know how. For if it is someone I can beat easily, why, before I have been playing 10 minutes, I am busily working out the next chapter of a book, or answering letters I have just got in the mail. Recently I came upon a book, The Psychology of Relaxation, by Dr. Patrick, in which the theory of this is set forth. Civilized man is working his higher brain centers more than his body can stand. His brain is running away with him, absorbing a constantly increasing share of his energies. True relaxation is only possible where the higher brain centers are lulled, and the back lobes of the brain brought into activity. One of the means of doing this is alcohol, and that is why, through the ages, all races of men have craved to get drunk. There is a method which is harmless and does not break down the system, and that is play. When we become really interested in play, we are as children or as primitive man. We do all the things that our race used to do many ages ago. We hunt and fight, we pit our wits against the wits of our enemies, and struggle with desperation to get the better of them. If our play is physical play, if we are absorbed in a game or bodily contest, then we are exerting and developing all those portions of us which civilization tends to atrophy and deaden. There are people who will dispute with you about socialism, and ask how we are going to provide incentives if we do away with wage slavery. When you tell them that activity is natural to human beings, and that if there were no work, men and women would have to make some, they shake their heads mournfully and tell you about the problem of human nature. But consider games and sports. Men do not have to work their bodies, yet they go out and deliberately hunt for trouble. They invent themselves subtle and complicated games, and are not content until they find people who can beat them at it. or at any rate can make them work to the limit of their strength, until they are in a dripping perspiration and thoroughly exhausted. I may be too optimistic about human nature, but I believe that this is the attitude every normal human being takes toward the powers, both mental and physical, which he possesses. He wants to use them, and for all they are worth. If you don't believe it, just take any group of youngsters, give them a baseball and bat, turn them loose in a vacant lot, and watch them choose up sides and fall to work, screaming and shouting in wild excitement. There are some races of the earth which do not yet know baseball, but the Filipinos and the Japanese have learned it, and even the war-worn Poilus and their supercilious Tommies condescended to experiment with it. And if you think it is only physical competition that young human animals enjoy, try them at putting on a play, or printing a magazine, or conducting a debate, or building a house. Anything whatever that involves healthy competition and is related to the big things of life, but without being for the profit of some exploiter. Get clear the plain and simple distinction between work and play. Play is what you want to do, while work is what the profit system makes you do. End of chapter 24. Chapters 25 and 26 of the Book of Life by Upton Sinclair. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 25, The Fasting Cure, deals with nature's own remedy for disease and how to make use of it. We have next to consider the various human ailments, what causes them, and how they can be remedied. As it happens, I know of a cure that comes pretty near being that impossible thing, a cure-all. At any rate, it is so far ahead of other cures that a discussion of it will cover 3/4 of the subject. When I was a boy living in New York, there was a man by the name of Dr. Tanner, who took a 40-day fast. He was on public exhibition at the time, and was supposed to be watched day and night. The newspapers gave a great deal of attention to the story, and crowds used to come to gaze at him. I remember very well the conversations I heard about the matter. People were quite sure that it couldn't be true. The man must be getting something to eat on the sly. He must have some nourishment in the water he drank. No human being could fast more than 5 or 6 days without starving to death. In the year 1910, I published in the United States and England a magazine article telling how on several occasions I had fasted 10 or 12 days, and what I had accomplished by it. I found that I had the same difficulty to confront as old Dr. Tanner. I received scores of letters from people who called me a faker, and I read scores of newspaper editorials to the same effect. The New York Times published a dispatch about 3 young ladies on Long Island who were trying a 3-day fast, and the Times commented editorially to the effect that these young ladies were the victims of a shallow and unscrupulous sensationalist. The notion that human beings can perish for lack of food in a few days is deeply rooted in people's minds. Recently, a group of 11 Irishmen in jail set to work to starve themselves to death, as a protest against British rule in their country. Day after day, the newspapers reported the news from Cork prison, and at about the 20th day they began to state that the prisoners were dying, that the priest had been sent for, that their relatives were gathered on the prison steps. Day after day such reports continued, through the 30s, and the 40s, and the 50s, and the 60s, and the 70s. One man died on the 88th day, and McSweeney died on the 74th. The other 9 gave up after 94 days, and were all restored to health. I watched carefully the newspaper and magazine comment on this incident, Yet I did not see a single remark on the medical aspects of it. I could not discover that scientific men had learned anything whatever about the ability of the body to go without food for long periods. Get this clear at the outset. Nobody ever starved to death in less than 2 months. And it is possible for a fat person to go without food for as long as 3 or 4 months. People who starve to death in shorter times do not die of starvation, but of fright. The first time I fasted happened to be at the time of the Messina earthquake. I was walking about perfectly serene and happy, having been without food for 3 days, and I read in my newspaper how the rescue ships had reached Messina and found the population ravenous, in the agonies of starvation, some of the people having been without food for 72 hours. It sounds so much worse, you see, when you state it in hours. The second point to get clear is that the fast is a physiological process. That is to say, it is something which nature understands and carries through in her own serene and efficient way. When you take a fast, you are not carrying out a freak notion of your own or of mine. You are discovering a lost instinct. Every cat and dog knows enough not to take food when it is ill. It is only in hospitals conducted by modern medical science that the custom prevails of serving elaborate trays to invalids. I remember a story about a man who made himself a reputation and a fortune by curing the pet dogs of the rich. These beautiful little creatures, which sleep between silken covers, and have several servants to wait upon them, and are fed from gold and silver dishes upon rich and elaborately cooked foods, fall victim to as many diseases as their mistresses, and they would be brought to this specialist, who conducted his dog hospital in an old brickyard. In each one of the compartments of the brick kiln he would shut up a dog with a supply of fresh water, a crust of stale bread, a piece of bacon rind, and the sole of an old shoe. And after a few days he would go back and find that the dog had eaten the crust of bread, and then he would write to the owner that the dog was on the high road to recovery. He would go back a few days later and find that the dog had eaten the piece of bacon rind, and then he would write that the dog was very nearly cured. He would wait until the dog had eaten the piece of shoe leather, and then he would write that the dog was completely cured and the owner might come and take it away. Just what is the process of the fast cure? I do not pretend to know positively. I can only make guesses, and wait for science to investigate. I believe that the main source of diseases of civilized man is improper nutrition and the clogging of the system with food poisons in various stages. And when you fast, you do 2 things. First, you stop entirely the fresh supply of those food poisons, and second, you allow the whole of the body's digestive and assimilative tract to rest, to go to sleep, as it were, so that all the body's energy may go to other organs. The body carries with it at all times a surplus store of nutriment, which can be taken up and used by the bloodstream, apparently with much less trouble than is required to convert fresh food to the body's uses. In other words, the body can feed on its own tissues more easily than it can feed from the stomach. In the fast, you may lose anywhere from half a pound to 2 pounds in weight per day, and this will be taken first from your store of fat, and then from your muscular tissues. Every part of your muscular tissue will be taken before anything is taken from your vital organs, your nerves, or your bloodstream. So long as there is a particle of muscular material left, so long as you can make even the slightest movement of one finger, you are still fasting. And it is only when your muscular tissue is all gone that you begin at last to starve. So far as I know, the cases of McSweeney and the other Irishman are the only cases on record where fasters have died of starvation. What the body does during the fast is quite plain, and can be told by many symptoms. It begins a thorough house cleaning, throwing out poisonous material by every channel. The perspiration and breath become offensive, the tongue becomes heavily coated, so that you can scrape the material off with a knife. I have heard vegetarians explain this by saying that when the body is living off its own tissues, it is following a cannibal diet. But that is all nonsense, because you can live on meat exclusively and quickly satisfy yourself that none of these symptoms occurs. It is evident that the body is taking advantage of the opportunity to get rid of waste products, and this will go on for 10 days, for 20 days, in some cases for as long as 40 or 50 days, and then suddenly occurs a strange thing. In spite of the cannibal diet, the symptoms all come to a sudden end. The tongue clears, the breath becomes sweet, the appetite suddenly awakens. During the period of a normal fast, you lose all interest in food. You almost forget that there is such a thing as eating. You can look at food without any more desire for it than you have to swallow marbles and carpet tacks. But then suddenly appetite returns, as I have explained, and you find that you can think of nothing but food. This is what students of the subject describe as a complete fast. And while I do not want to go to extremes and say that the complete fast will cure every case of every disease, I can certainly say this. In the letters which have come to me from people who tried the fast at my suggestion, there are cases of every kind of common disease. In my book, The Fasting Cure, I give the results of cases reported to me after the publication of my first magazine article. I quote 2 paragraphs. The total number of fasts taken was 277, and the average number of days was 6. There were 90 of 5 days or over, 51 of 10 days or over, and 6 of 30 days or over. Out of the 119 persons who wrote to me, 100 reported benefit, and 17 no benefit. Of these 17, about half give wrong breaking of the fast as the reason for the failure. In cases where the cure had not proved permanent, about half mentioned that the recurrence of the trouble was caused by wrong eating. About half of the rest made this quite evident by what they said. Also, it is to be noted that in the cases of the 17 who got no benefit, nearly all were fasts of only 3 or 4 days. Following is the complete list of diseases benefited. 45 of the cases have been diagnosed by physicians. Indigestion, usually associated with nervousness, 27. Rheumatism, 5. Colds, 8. Tuberculosis, 4. Constipation, 14. Poor circulation, 3. Headaches, 5. Anemia, 3. Scrofula, 1. Bronchial trouble, 5. Syphilis, 1. Liver trouble, 5. General debility, 5. Chills and fever, 1. Blood poisoning, 1. Ulcerated leg, 1. Neurasthenia, 6. Locomotor ataxia, 1. Sciatica, 1. Asthma, 2. Excess of uric acid, 1. Epilepsy, 1. Pleurisy, 1. Impaction of bowels, 1. Eczema, 2. Catarrh, 6. Appendicitis, 3. Valvular disease of heart, 1. Insomnia, 1. Gas poisoning, 1. Grip, 1. Cancer, 1. There are many diseases with many causes, and some yield more quickly than others to the fast. In the first group, I put the diseases of the digestive and alimentary tract. Stomach and bowel troubles, and the nervous disorders occasioned by these, stop almost immediately when you fast. Next come disorders of the bloodstream, which are generally a second stage of digestive troubles. Everything immediately due to the impurities of the blood, pimples, boils and ulcers, inflammation, badly healing wounds, etc., respond to a few days of fasting as to the magic touch of the old-time legends. When it comes to diseases caused by germ infections, you have a double aspect of the problem, and must have a double method of attack. I would not like to say that fasting could cure such a disease as sleeping sickness, to the germs of which our systems are not accustomed, and against which they may well be helpless. On the other hand, in the case of common infections, such as colds and sore throats, the fast is again the touch of magic. Having been plagued a great deal by these ailments in past times, I am accustomed to say that I would not trade my knowledge of fasting for everything else that I know about health. The first thing you must do if you want to take a fast is to read the literature on the subject, and make up your mind that the experiment will do you no injury. You should also try to get your relatives to make up their minds, because you are nervous when you are fasting, and cannot withstand the attacks of the people around you, who will go into a panic and throw you into a panic. As I said before, it is quite possible for people to die of panic, but I do not believe that anybody ever died of a fast. I have known of 2 or 3 cases of people dying while they were fasting, but I feel quite certain that the fast did not cause their death. They would have died anyhow. You must bear in mind that among the people who try the fast, a great many are in a desperate condition. Some have been given up by the doctors, and if now and then one of these should die, we may surely say that they died in spite of the fast and not because of it. There is no physician who can save every patient, and it would be absurd to expect this. I have read scores of letters from people who were at the point of death from such fatal diseases as Bright's disease, sclerosis of the liver, and fatty degeneration of the heart, and were literally snatched out of the jaws of death by beginning a fast. I would not like to guess just what percentage of dying people in our hospitals might be saved if the doctors would withdraw all food from them. But I await with interest the time when medical science will have the intelligence to try that simple experiment and report the results. Just the other day in the Los Angeles County Jail, a chiropractor went on hunger strike as a protest against imprisonment, and he fasted 41 days. Then he broke his fast, the reason being given that his pulse was down to 54, and he was afraid of dying. I smiled to myself. The normal pulse is 70. I have taken my pulse many times at the end of a 10-day fast, and it has been as low as 32, and I am not dead yet. And if I wait to die from the symptoms of a fast, I expect to live a long time indeed. The first time I fasted, I felt very weak, and lay around and hardly cared to lift my head. If I walked from my bed to the lawn, I was tired in the legs. But since then, I have grown used to fasting. I have fasted for a week, probably 20 or 30 times, and on such occasions I have gone about my business as if nothing were happening. Of course, I would not try to play tennis or to climb a mountain, but it is a fact that on the 7th day of a fast in New York, I climbed the 5 or 6 flights of stairs to the top of the Metropolitan Opera House, and felt no ill effects from doing this. I climbed slowly, and was careful not to tire myself. The simple rule is not to have anything that you must do on the fast, and then do what you feel like doing. Lie down and rest, and read a book, and take as much exercise as you find you enjoy. Keep your mind quiet and free from worries, and lock out of the house everybody who tells you that your heart is going to stop beating in the next few minutes, and that you must have an injection of strychnine to start it, and some beefsteak and fried onions to restore your strength. Give yourself up to the care of your wise old Mother Nature, who will attend to your heart just as securely and serenely as she attended to it in the days before you were born. By fasting, I mean that you take no food whatever. I know some nature cure teachers who practice what they call a fruit fast. All I know is that if I eat nothing but fruit, I soon have my stomach boiling with fermentation, and also I suffer with hunger, whereas if I take a complete fast, I promptly forget all about food. You must drink all the water you can on the fast. This helps nature with her house cleaning. It is well to drink a glass of water every half hour at least. Do not try to go without water, and then write me that the fasting cure is a failure. Also, please do not write and ask me if it will be fasting if you take just a little crackers and milk, or some soup, or something else that you think doesn't count. I recommend a dose of laxative to clean out the system at the beginning of a fast, because the bowels are apt to become sluggish at once, and the quicker you get the system cleansed, the better. It does no good to take laxatives if you are going to pile in more food. But if you are going to fast, that is a different matter. You should take a full warm enema every day during the fast, so long as it brings any results. There are some people whose bowels are so frightfully clogged that I have known the enema to bring results even in the second and third weeks. On the other hand, if there is no solid matter to be removed, a small enema every day will suffice. Take a warm bath every day, and needless to say, you should get all the fresh air you can, and should sleep as much as you can. You may have difficulty in sleeping because the fast is apt to make you nervous and wakeful. I have known people who could not fast because they could not sleep, and I have taught them a little trick: to put a hot water bottle at the feet and another on the abdomen to draw the blood away from the head, so they would quickly fall asleep, and they got great benefit from their fasts. You should supply yourself with good music if you can, and with plenty of good reading matter. You will be amazed to find how active your mind becomes, because you had never known before what a mind you had. Your blood has always been so clogged with food poisons that you didn't know you could think. My 3-act play, The Nature Woman, was conceived and written in 2 days and a half on a fast. But I do not recommend this kind of thing. On the contrary, I strongly urge against it, because if you work your brain on a fast, you do not get the good from your fast, and you do not recover so quickly. Put off all your problems until you have got your health back, and seek only to divert your mind while fasting. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26. Breaking the fast. Discusses various methods of building up the body after a fast, especially the milk diet. There remains the question of how to break the fast, and this is the most important part of the problem. You may undo all the good of your fast by breaking it wrong, and you are 1,000 times as apt to kill yourself then as while you are fasting. When your hunger comes back, it comes back with a rush, and some people have not the willpower to control it. I do not advocate a complete fast in any case except of serious chronic disease, and then only under the advice of someone with experience. But I advocate a short fast of a week or 10 days for almost every common ailment, and I know that such a fast will help, even where it may not completely cure. You may go on fasting so long as you are quiet and happy, but when you find you are becoming too weak for comfort, or for the peace of mind of your family physician and your friends, you may break your fast, and show them that it is possible to restore your strength and body weight, and then they won't bother so much when you try it again. Take nothing but liquid foods in the breaking of a fast. I recommend the juices of fruits and tomatoes, also meat broths. If you have fasted a week or two, take 1/4 of a glass. If you have fasted a month, take a tablespoonful, and wait and see what the results are. Remember that your whole alimentary tract is out of action, and give it a chance to start up slowly. Take small quantities of liquid food every 2 hours for the first day. Then you can begin taking larger quantities, and on the next day you can try some milk, or a soft poached egg, or the pulp of cooked apples or prunes. Do not take any solid food until you are quite sure you can digest it, and then take only a very little. Do not take any starchy food until the 3rd day. I have known people to break these rules. I knew a man who broke his fast on a Hamburg steak, and he had to be helped out with a stomach pump. Once I broke a week's fast with a plate of rich soup, because I was at a friend's house and there was nothing else, and I yielded to the claims of hospitality, and made myself ill and had to fast for several days longer. The easiest way to break a fast is upon a milk diet. I have seen hundreds of people take this diet, and very few who did not get benefit. The first time I fasted, which was 12 days, I lost 17 pounds, and I took the milk diet for 24 days thereafter, and gained 32 pounds. I took it at McFadden's Sanitarium, where I had every attention. Since then, I have many times tried to take a milk diet by myself, but have never been able to get it to agree with me. I do not know how to explain this fact. I state it to show how hard it is to lay down general rules. On the milk diet, you take into your system 2 or 3 times as much food as you can assimilate, and this is a violation of all my diet rules, but it appears that the bacteria which thrive in milk produce lactic acid, which is not harmful to the system, and if you do not take other foods, you may safely keep the system flooded with milk. After a fast, you should begin with small quantities of milk, and by the 3rd day you may be taking a full glass of warm milk every half hour or every 20 minutes, until you have taken 7 or 8 quarts per day. It is better to take it warm, but sometimes people take it just as well without warming. Dr. Porter, who has a book on the milk diet, insists upon complete rest and makes his patients stay in bed. McFadden, on the other hand, recommends gymnastics in the morning before the milk, and during the afternoon he recommends a rest from the milk for a couple of hours, followed by abdominal exercises to keep the bowels open. This is very important during a fast, because you are taking great quantities of material into your system, and it must not be permitted to clog. Therefore, take an enema daily, if necessary, to a free movement. Also, take a warm bath daily. Take the juice of oranges and lemons, if you crave them. Upon one thing everyone who has had experience with the milk diet agrees, and that is the necessity of absolute mental rest. If you become excited, or nervous, or angry on a milk diet, you may turn all the contents of your stomach into hard curds, and may put yourself into convulsions. The wonderful thing about the milk diet is the state of physical and mental bliss it makes possible. It is the ideal way of breaking a fast, because it leaves you no chance to get hungry. You have all the food you want, and your system is bathed in happiness, a sense of peace and well-being which is truly marvelous and not to be described. You gain anywhere from a half a pound to 2 pounds a day, and you feel that you have never before in your life known what perfect health could be. The fast sets you a new standard. You discover how nature meant you to enjoy life, and never again are you content with that kind of half existence with which you managed to worry along before you discovered this remedy. But let me hasten to add that I do not recommend the fast as a regular habit of life. The fast is an emergency measure to enable the body to cleanse itself and to cure disease. When you have got your body clean and free from disease, it is your business to keep it that way, and you should apply your reason to the problem of how to live so that you will not have to fast. If you find that you continue to have ailments, then you must be eating wrongly, or overworking, or committing some other offense against nature. Either that, or else you must have some organic trouble. A bone in your spine is out of place, as the osteopaths tell you, or your eyes out of focus, or your appendix twisted and infected. I do not claim that the fasting cure will supplant the surgeons and the oculists and the dentists. It will not mend your bones if you break them, and it will not repair your teeth, which are already decayed. But it will help to keep your teeth from decaying in the future, and it will help you to prepare for a surgical operation, and to recover from it more quickly. I had to undergo an operation for rupture a couple of years ago, and I fasted for 2 days before the operation and for 3 days after it, and I had no particle of nausea from the ether, and was able to tend to my mail the day after the operation. There is one disease for which I hesitate to recommend the fast, and that is tuberculosis, because I have been told of cases in which the patient lost weight and did not recover it. However, in my tabulation of 277 cases, you will note 4 cases of tuberculosis, and in my book is given a letter from a patient who claimed great benefit. If I had the misfortune to contract tuberculosis, I would take a 3 or 4 day rest, followed by a milk diet for a long period. The milk diet is pleasant to take, and it cannot possibly do any harm. If it did not affect a cure, I would try the Salisbury treatment. That is, lean meat ground up and medium cooked, and nothing else, except an abundance of hot water between meals. Professor Irving Fisher wrote me that there is urgent need of experiment to determine proper diet in tuberculosis, and until these experiments have been made, we can only grope. I am quite sure that the stuffing system, ordinarily used by doctors, is a tragic mistake. In the case of any other disease whatever, even though I might take medical or surgical treatment, I would supplement this by a fast, because there is no kind of a treatment which does not succeed better with the blood in good condition. In the case of emergencies, accidents, wounds, etc., I would rest assured that recovery would be more prompt if I were fasting. When David Graham Phillips was shot, I wrote a letter to the New York Call, saying that his doctors had killed him because they had fed him while he was lying in a critical condition in the hospital. To take nutriment into the body under such circumstances is the greatest of blunders. The fast will help children, just as it helps adults, only they do not need to fast so long. It will help the aged and make them feel young. You need not be afraid to fast, no matter how old you are. It is, of course, an immediate cure for fatness, and strange as it may seem, it is also a cure for unnatural thinness. People with ravenous appetites are just as apt to be thin as to be fat, because it is not what you eat that builds up your body, but only what you assimilate. And if you eat too much, you can make it impossible to assimilate anything properly. If you take a fast and break it carefully, your body will come to its normal weight and all your functions to their normal activity. A physician wrote me, taking me to task for listing among the cures reported in my tabulation a case of locomotor ataxia. This disease, he explained, is caused because a portion of a nerve has been entirely destroyed, and it is a disease that is absolutely and positively and forever incurable. I answered that I knew this to be the teaching of present-day medical science, but I invited him to consider for a moment what happens in nature. When a crab loses a claw, we do not take it as a matter of course that the crab must go about with one claw for the balance of his life. Nature will make that crab another claw. Man has lost the power of replacing a lost leg, but he still retains the power of replacing tissue which has been cut away by a surgeon's knife. And medical science takes this as a matter of course. How shall anybody say that nature has forever lost the power of rebuilding a bit of nervous tissue? How shall anyone say that if the bloodstream is cleansed of poisons and the energy of the whole body restored, one of the results may not be the repairing of a broken nerve connection? I invite my readers who have ailments, and especially I invite all medical men among my readers, to make a fair test of the fasting cure. The results will surprise them, and they will quickly be forced to revise their methods of treating illness. End of chapter 26. Chapter 27 of the Book of Life by Upton Sinclair. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 27. Diseases and Cures. Discusses some of the commoner human ailments and what is known about their cause and cure. I begin with the commonest of all troubles, known as a cold. This name implies that the cause of the trouble lies in exposure or chill. All the grandmothers of the world are agreed about this. They have a phrase, or at least they had it when I was a boy: "You will catch your death." Every time I went out in the rain, every time I played with wet feet, or sat in a draft, or got under a cold shower, I would hear the formula, "You will catch your death." And on the other hand, there are the health cranks, who declare vehemently that the name cold is a misnomer and a trap for people's thoughts. Cold has nothing to do with it, they say, and point to Arctic explorers who frequently got frozen to death, but do not catch cold until they get back into the warm rooms of civilization. As for drafts, the health cranks aver that a draft is merely fresh air moving, which is supposed to settle the matter. However, when you come to think about it, you realize that a cyclone is likewise merely fresh air moving, so you have not decided the question by a phrase. While I was writing these chapters on health, I contracted a severe cold, which was a joke on me. The history of this cold is as clear in my mind as anything human can be, and it will serve for an illustration, showing how much truth the grandmothers have on their side, and how much the health cranks have. To begin with, I had been overworking. All sorts of appeals come to me. Hundreds of people write me letters, and I cannot bear to leave them unanswered. I accepted calls to speak, and invitations where I had to eat a lot of stuff of which my reason disapproves. So one morning I woke up with a slight sore throat. I fasted all day, and by evening felt all right. But there came another call, and I consented to take a long automobile ride on a cold and rainy night, and when I got back home, after 5 or 6 hours, I was thoroughly chilled, and my cold came on during the night. This explanation will, I imagine, be satisfactory to all the grandmothers of the world. All the dear, good grandmothers know that an automobile ride on a cold, rainy night is enough to give any man his death. But listen, grandmothers, I have lain out watching for deer all night in the late fall, with only a thin blanket to cover me, and gotten up so stiff with cold that I could hardly move, yet I did not catch cold. When I was a youth, I have ridden a bicycle 20 miles to the beach in April, with snow on the ground, and plunged into the surf and swam, and then ridden home again. I have bathed in the sea when I had to run a quarter of a mile in a bathing suit along a frost-covered pier, and with an icy wind blowing through my bones, yet I never took cold from that, and never got anything but a feeling of exhilaration. So it must be that there is some reason why exposure causes colds at one time, and not at another. The explanation takes you over to the health cranks. They understand that your bloodstream must be clogged, your bodily tone reduced by bad air and lack of exercise, and more especially by overeating or by an improperly balanced diet. But then most of them go to extremes, and insist that the automobile ride and the chilled condition of my body had nothing to do with my cold. But I know otherwise. I have watched the thing happen so often. In times when I was run down, the slightest exposure would cause me a cold, literally, in a few minutes. I have got myself a sore throat going out to the woodpile on a winter day with nothing on my head. I have got a cold by sitting still with wet feet, or by sitting in a draft on a warm summer day when I had been perspiring a little. How to explain this I am not sure, but my guess is that you drive the blood away from the surface of the body at a time when it is weakened and exposed to infection, and you drive away the army of the white corpuscles and give the battlefield of your body to the germs. I know there are nature curists who argue that germs have nothing to do with disease, but they have never been able to convince me. Germs are too real, and too many, and too easy to watch. If you leave a piece of meat exposed to the air in warm temperature, the germs in the air will settle upon it and begin to feed upon it and to multiply. The meat, being dead, is powerless to protect itself. But your nose and throat are also meat, and just as good food for those germs. The only difference is that this meat is alive. There is a living bloodstream circulating through it, and several score billions of the body's own kind of germs, the blood corpuscles. If these blood corpuscles are sound and properly nourished, and are brought to the place of infection, they are able to destroy all the common germs. So it is that you do not have diseases, but instead have health. But your health always implies a struggle of your organism against other organisms, and it is the business of your reason to watch your body and give all the help you can in protecting it. Coughs and colds, sore throats and headaches are the first warnings that your defenses are being weakened. As a rule, these ailments are not serious in themselves, but they are signs of a wrong condition, and if you neglect this condition, pretty soon you will find that you have to deal with something deadly. My cure for a cold is to take an enema and a laxative, eat nothing for 24 hours, and drink plenty of water. If you have a severe cold or sore throat, you will be wise to lie in bed for a day or two by an open window. You may also use sprays and gargles if you wish, but you will find them of little use because the germs are deep in your mucous membranes and cannot all be reached from the outside. In the old sad days of my ignorance, I would get a cold and go to the doctor and have my throat and nose pumped full of black and green and yellow and purple liquids, which did me absolutely no good whatever. The cold would stay on for 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes for 8 or 10 weeks, and I would be miserable, utterly desperate. I was dying by inches, and not one of the doctors could tell me why. The next most common ailment is a headache, and this means poisons in your bloodstream. It may be from improper diet, from alcohol or drugs, or bad air or nervous excitement. If it is none of these things, then you should begin to look for some organic difficulty, eye strain, for example, or perhaps defects in the spine. The osteopaths and the chiropractors specialize on the spine and have made important discoveries. Their doctrine is, in brief, that the nervous force which directs the bloodstream is carried to the organs of the body by nerves which leave the spinal cord through openings between the vertebrae. If any of these openings are pinched, you have a diminished nerve supply, which means ill health in that part of the body to which the nerve leads. That such trouble can be corrected by straightening the bones of the spine seems perfectly reasonable, but like most people with a new idea, the discoverers proceed to carry it to absurd extremes. I have before me an official chiropractic pamphlet, which states that vertebral displacement is the physical and perpetuating cause of 95% of all cases of disease, the remaining 5% being due to subluxations of other skeletal segments. And naturally, people who believe this will devote nearly all their study to the bones and the nervous system. But surely there are other parts of your body which are necessary besides bones and nerves. And what if some of these parts happen to be malformed and defective? What if your eyes do not focus properly, and you are continually wearing out the optic nerve, thus giving yourself headaches and neurasthenia? What if you have an appendix that has been twisted and malformed from birth, and is a center of infection so long as it remains in the body? Several years ago I had an experience with the appendix, from which I learned something about one of the commonest human ailments, constipation, or sluggishness of the bowels. This is a cause of innumerable chronic ailments grouped under the head of auto-intoxication, or the poisoning of the body by the absorption into the system of the products of fermentation and decay in the bowels. The bowels should move freely 2 or 3 times every day, and the movements should be soft. I suffered from constipation for some 20 years, and tried, I think, every remedy known to science and to crankdom. In the beginning, the doctors gave me drugs, which, by irritating the intestinal walls, cause them to pour out quantities of water and hurry the irritating substances down the intestinal tract. That is all right for an emergency. If you have swallowed a poison, or food which is spoiled, or if you have overeaten and are ill, get your system cleaned out by any and every device. But if you habitually swallow mild poisons, which is what all laxatives are, you weaken the intestinal tract, and you have to take more and more of these poisons, and you get less results. We may set down as positive the statement that drugs are not a remedy for constipation. Next comes diet. Eat the rough and bulky foods, say the nature curists, and stimulate the intestinal walls to activity. I tried that. I listened to the extreme enthusiast, and boiled whole wheat and ate it, and consumed quantities of bran biscuit, and of a Japanese seaweed which Dr. Kellogg prepares, and of petroleum oil, and even the skins of oranges, which are most uncomfortable eating. I assure you, I would eat things like this until I got myself a case of diarrhea, and so was cured of constipation for a time. Strange as it may seem to you, there are even people who tell you to eat sand. I listened to them, and ate many quarts. And then there is exercise. McFadden taught me a whole series of exercises for developing the muscles of the abdominal walls and the back, which are greatly neglected by civilized man. The fundamental cause of constipation is a sluggish life, and to exercise our bodies is a duty. But to me, it was always an agony of boredom to lie on a bed and wiggle my abdomen for a quarter of an hour. The same thing applies to hot water treatments, which are effective, but a nuisance and a waste of time. I never could keep them up, except when I was in trouble. 3 or 4 years ago I began to notice a continual irritating pain on my right side, which I quickly realized must lie in the appendix. I tried massage, and hot and cold water treatments, and my favorite remedy, a week's fast. The pain disappeared, but it returned. So finally I decided, to the dismay of my physical culture friends, to have the appendix out. For years I had been reading the statements of nature curists that the appendix is an important and vital part of the body, which pours an oil or something into the intestinal tract, and so helps to prevent constipation. Well, evidently my appendix wasn't doing its job, so I took it to a good surgeon. What I found was that it had been twisted and malformed from birth, so that it was a center of continuous infection. From the time that I had the operation, I have never had to think about the subject of constipation. This experience suggests to me how easy it is for people to make statements about health which have no relationship to facts. I do not recommend promiscuous surgery, and I perfectly well realize that if human beings would take proper care of their health, the great proportion of surgical operations would be unnecessary. I realize also that surgeons get paid by the job, and therefore have a money interest in operating, and it is perfectly futile to expect that none of them will ever be influenced by the profit motive. Nevertheless, it is true that sometimes surgical operations are necessary, and that by standing a little temporary inconvenience, you can save yourself a lifetime of discomfort. Take, for example, rupture. The human body has here a natural weakness from which there results a dangerous and uncomfortable affliction. Hundreds of thousands of men are going around all their lives wearing elaborate and expensive trusses which are almost, if not entirely, useless, and trying advertised cures which are entirely fakes. An operation takes an hour or two, and 2 or 3 weeks in bed, and when our government drafted its young men into the army and found that 14 in every 1,000 of them had rupture, it shipped them into hospitals wholesale and sewed them up. It happens that rupture affords one case where scar tissue is stronger than natural tissue, and there were practically no returns from the great number of army cases. Likewise, you find extreme statements repeated concerning the evils of vaccination. But if you will read Parkman's History of the Jesuits in North America, you will see the horrible conditions under which the Indians lived in the United States. Noble savages, you understand, entirely uncontaminated by civilized white men, and whole populations regularly wiped out every few years by epidemics of smallpox. That these epidemics ceased was due to the discovery that by infecting the body with a mild form of the disease, it could be made to develop substances which render it immune to the deadly form. Here in California, we have a law which makes vaccination for school children optional, and so we may someday have another epidemic to test the theories of the anti-vaccinationists. I know, of course, the dreadful stories of people who have been given syphilis and other diseases by impure vaccines. I don't know whether such stories are true, but I do know that people who live in houses are sometimes killed by earthquakes and by lightning, yet we do not cease to live in houses because of this chance. It seems to me that the remedy for such vaccination evils is not to abolish vaccination, but to take more care in the manufacture of our vaccines. This danger is removed by using vaccines which are sterile and are made especially for each person. Germs are taken from the sick person and injected into an animal. The body of the animal develops with great rapidity the antibodies necessary to resistance to the germs. And as these antibodies are chemical products not affected by heat, we can take a serum from the animal, sterilize it, and then inject it into the system of the patient, thus increasing resistance to the disease. I admit that the best way to increase such resistance is to take care of your health. But sometimes we confront an emergency, and we must use emergency remedies. We have serums that really cure diphtheria and meningitis, and one that will prevent lockjaw. Anyone who has ever seen with his own eyes how the deadly membranes of diphtheria melt away as a result of an injection will be less dogmatic about the efforts of science to combat disease. Of course, it is much pleasanter if you can destroy the source of the disease and keep it from getting into the human body. Every few years, the southern part of our country used to be devastated by yellow fever epidemics. Every kind of weird and fantastic remedy was tried. People would go around with sponges full of vinegar hung under their noses. They would burn the clothing and bedding of those who died of the disease. They would wear gloves when they went shopping, so as not to touch the money with their hands. But at last, medical experimenters traced the disease to a certain kind of mosquito. And now, if we drain the swamps and screen our houses and stay indoors after sundown, we do not get yellow fever, nor malaria either. In the same way, if we keep our bodies clean with soap and hot water, we do not get bitten by lice, and so do not die of typhus. If we take pains with our drains and water supply so that human excrement does not get into it, and if we destroy the filth-carrying housefly, we do not have epidemics of typhoid. But under conditions of battle, it is not possible for men to take these precautions, and so when they go into the army, they get a dose of typhoid serum. And this illustrates the difference between a true or hygienic remedy for a disease and a temporary or emergency remedy. If you say that you want to abolish war, and with it the need for typhoid vaccination, I cheerfully agree with you in this. All I am trying to do is to point out the folly of flying to extremes and rejecting any remedy which may help. What is the use of making the flat statement that vaccinations and serums never aid in the cure of disease, when any man can see with his own eyes the proof that they do? In the Spanish War, before typhoid vaccination, many times more soldiers died of this disease than died of bullets. But in the late war, there was practically no typhoid at all in the army camps. On the other hand, it was noticed that the men who had just come in, and who therefore had just been vaccinated, were considerably more susceptible to influenza, which shows that vaccination does reduce the body condition for a time. The reader may say that in this case I am trying to sit on both sides of the fence. But the truth is that I am trying to keep an open mind and to consider all the facts and to avoid making rash statements. One of the statements you hear most frequently is that drugs can never remedy disease, or help in remedying it. Now, I abhor the drugging system of the orthodox medical men. I have talked with them and heard them talk with one another, and I know that they will mix up half a dozen different substances in the vague hope that some one of them will have some effect. Even when they know definitely the effects they are producing, they are in many cases merely suppressing symptoms. On the other hand, however, it is a fact that medical science has had for a generation or two a specific which destroys the germs of one disease in the blood, without at the same time injuring the blood itself. That disease is malaria, and the drug is quinine. Of course, the way to avoid malaria is to drain the swamps. But you cannot do that all at once, nor can you always screen your house and stay in at sundown. When you first go into a country, you have no house to screen, and some emergency will certainly arise that exposes you to mosquito bites. So you will need quinine, and will be foolish not to use it, and know how to use it. Recent medical chemists discovered another remedy, this time for syphilis. It is called salvarsan, and while it does not always cure, it frequently does. In laboratories today, men are working over the problem of constructing a combination of molecules which will destroy the germ of sleeping sickness, without at the same time injuring the blood. If they find it, they will save hundreds of millions of lives. I do not see why we cannot recognize such a possibility, while at the same time making use of physical culture, of diet and fasting. When the manuscript of this book was sent to the printer, there appeared in this place a paragraph telling of the work of Dr. Albert Abrams of San Francisco, in the diagnosis and cure of disease by means of radioactive vibrations. As the book is going to press, the writer finds himself in San Francisco attending Dr. Abrams' clinics, and so he finds it possible to give a more extended account of some fascinating discoveries which seem destined to revolutionize medical science. If I were to tell you all that I have seen with my own eyes in the last 12 days, I fear the reader would find his powers of credulity overstretched. So I shall content myself with trying to tell, in very sober and cautious language, the theory upon which Abrams is working, and the technique which he has evolved. Modern science has demonstrated that all matter is simply the activity of electrons, minute particles of electric force. This is a statement which no present-day physicist would dispute. The best evidence appears to indicate that a molecule of matter is a minute reproduction of the universe, a system of electrons whirling about a central nucleus. No eye has ever beheld an electron, for it is billions of times smaller than anything the microscope makes visible. But we can see the effects of electronic activity, and all modern books of physics give photographs of such. It is possible to determine the vibration rates of electrons, And to Dr. Abrams occurred the idea of determining the vibration rates of diseased tissue and disease germs. He discovered that it was invariably the same. Not merely does all cancerous material, for example, yield the same rate, but the blood of a person suffering from cancer yields that rate at all times and under all circumstances. The vibration of cancer, of tuberculosis, of syphilis, each is different, uniform, and invariable. Likewise, in the blood are other vibrations, uniform and dependable, which reveal the sex and age of the patient, the virulence of the disease, and the period of its duration. Yes, and even the location in the body, if there be some definite infected area. So here is a modern miracle, an infallible device for the diagnosis of disease. Dr. Abrams does not have to see the patient. All he has to have is a drop of blood on a piece of white blotting paper, and he sits in his laboratory and tells all about it, and somewhere several thousand miles away, in Toronto or Boston or New Orleans, a surgeon operates and finds what he has been told is there. And that is only the beginning of the wonder, because, says Abrams, if you know the vibration rate of the electrons of germs, you can destroy those germs. It used to be a favorite trick of Caruso to tap a glass and determine its musical note, and then sing that note at the glass and shatter it to bits. It is well known that horses, trotting swiftly on a bridge, have sometimes coincided in their step with the vibration of the bridge, and thus have broken it down. On that same principle, this wizard of the electron introduces into your body radioactivity of a certain rate. And shall I say that he cures cancer and syphilis and tuberculosis of many years' standing in a few treatments? I will not say that, because you would not and could not believe me. I will content myself with the telling what my wife and I have been watching twice a day for the past 12 days. The scene is a laboratory, with rows of raised seats at one side for the physicians who attend the clinic. There is a table with the instruments of measurement, and Dr. Abrams sits beside it, and before him stands a young man stripped to the waist. The doctor is tapping upon the abdomen of this man and listening to the sounds. You will find this the weirdest part of the whole procedure, for you will naturally assume that this young man is being examined, and will be dazed when someone explains that the patient is in Toronto or Boston or New Orleans, and that this young man's body is the instrument which the doctor uses in the determining of the vibration rates of the patient's blood. Dr. Abrams tried numerous instruments, but has been able to find nothing so sensitive to electronic activity as a human body. He explains to his classes that the spinal cord is composed of millions of nerve fibers of different vibration rates. Hence, a certain rate communicated to the body is automatically sorted out and appears on a certain precise spot of the body in the form of increased activity, increased blood pressure in the cells, and hence what all physicians know as a dull area, which can be discovered by what is known as percussion, a tapping with the finger. To map out these areas is merely a matter of long and patient experiment, and Abrams has been studying the subject for some 20 years. He is author of a textbook on what is known as the reactions of Abrams. So now he provides the world with a series of maps of the human body, and he sits in front of his subject, and his assistant places a specimen of blood in a little electrically connected box, and sets the rheostat at some vibration number, say 50, and Dr. Abrams taps on a certain square inch of the abdomen of his subject, and announces the dread word, cancer. Then he places the electrode on another part of the subject's body, and taps some more, and announces that it is cancer of the small intestine, left side. Some more tapping, and he announces that its intensity is 12 ohms, which is severe, and pretty soon there is speeding a telegram to the physician who has sent this blood specimen, telling him these facts, and prescribing a certain vibration rate upon the oscilloclast, the instrument of radioactivity which Dr. Abrams has devised. Now, you watch this thing for an hour or two, and you say to yourself, here is either the greatest magician in the history of mankind, or else the greatest maniac. You may have come prepared for some kind of fraud, but you soon dismiss that, for you realize that this man is desperately in earnest about what he is doing, and so are all the physicians who watch him. So you seek refuge in the thought that he must be deluding himself and them, perhaps unconsciously. But you talk with these men and discover that they have come from all over the country, and always for one reason. They had sent blood specimens to Abrams and found that he had never made a mistake. He told them more from a few drops of the patient's blood than they themselves had been able to find out from the whole patient. And then into the clinic come the doctor's own patients. I must have heard 60 or 80 of them tell their story, and many of them have been lifted from the grave. People 10 years blind from syphilis who can see. People operated on several times for cancer and given up for dying. People with tumors on the brain, or with one lung gone from tuberculosis. It is literally a fact that when you have sat in Abrams' clinic for a week, all disease loses its terrors. This, you see, is really the mastery of life. If we can measure and control the minute universe of the electron and the atom, we have touched the ultimate source of our bodily life. I might take chapters of this book to tell you of the strange experiments I have seen in this clinic, showing you, for instance, how these vibrations respond to thought, how by denying to himself the disease, the patient can, for a few moments, cancel in his body the activity of the harmful germs, showing how the reactions differ in the different sexes and at different ages, and how they respond to different colors and different drugs. Abrams' method has revealed the secret of such efficacy as drugs possess. Their work is done by their radioactivity and not by their chemical properties. Also, the problem of vaccination has been solved, for Abrams has discovered a dread new disease, which is bovine syphilis, originally caused in cattle by human inoculation, and now reintroduced into the human being by vaccination, and becoming the agent which prepares the soil of the body for such disorders as tuberculosis and cancer. And it appears that we can all be rendered immune to these diseases by a few electronic vibrations introduced into our bodies in childhood. So is opened up to our eyes a wonderful vision of a new race, purified and made fit for life. So here at last is science justified of her optimism, and our faith in human destiny forever vindicated. Take my advice, whoever you may be that are suffering, and find out about this new work and help to make it known to the world. There are many romances of medical science, some of them as fascinating as murder mysteries and big game hunting. Turn to McMaster's History of the People of the United States, and read his account of the terrible epidemic of yellow fever in Philadelphia 100 years ago. I have already referred to the weird and incredible things the people did in their effort to ward off this plague. Sponges of vinegar under their noses, and fever fires burning in the streets. And then a mosquito would fly up and bite them, and in a few hours they would be dead. Or what could be stranger than the tracing of the bubonic plague, which has cost literally billions of human lives, to a parasite in the blood of fleas which live on the bodies of rats? Or what could be more unexpected than the tracing of our rheumatic aches and twinges to the root canals of the teeth? One of the most common ailments which afflict poor humanity is rheumatism, a cause of endless suffering. It was supposed to be due to damp climate and exposure, and this is true to a certain extent, in the same way that colds are due to exposure. But the investigators realized that there must be some bodily condition rendering one susceptible, and they set to work to trace this condition down. The pains of rheumatism are caused by uric acid settling in the joints of the body. What causes the uric acid? Well, there is uric acid in red meat, so let us forbid rheumatic people to eat it. But this is overlooking the fact that the human body itself is a uric acid factory, and also the fact that uric acid taken into the stomach may not remain uric acid by the time it gets to the bloodstream. We know that you may eat a great deal of fruit acid without necessarily making acid blood. On the other hand, you can make acid blood by eating a lot of sugar. So you see, it isn't as simple as it sounds. Rheumatism has been traced to its lair, which is found to be the roots of the teeth. Here is a part of the body difficult to get at, and as a consequence of bad diet and unwholesome ways of living, infections will start there, and pus sacs be formed, and the poisons absorbed into the bloodstream and distributed throughout the body. The first thought is to draw the infected teeth. But that is a serious matter because you need your teeth to chew your food. So the dentist has to go through a complicated process of opening up the tooth and cleaning out the root canals and treating the infected spots at the roots. Then he has to fill the tooth all the way down to the roots, leaving no place for infection to gather. This, of course, takes time and costs money, and is one more illustration of the fact that there is one health law for the rich and another health law for the poor. All the time that I write these chapters about health, I feel guilty. I know that the wholesome food I recommend costs money, and I know that surgery and dentistry cost money. Yes, even sunlight and fresh air and recreation, even a fast, because you have to rest while you take it, and you have to have a roof over your head, and warmth in wintertime, and somebody to wait upon you when you are weak. I know that for a great many of the people who read what I write, all these things are impossible of attainment. I know that for the great majority of the common people, the benefits of science do not exist. Science discovers how to prevent disease, but the discoveries are not applied because the profit system controls the world, and the profit system wants the labor of the poor, regardless of what happens to their health. If the people fall ill, they are thrown upon the scrap heap, and the profit system finds others to take their place. Take, for example, tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is a germ infection, but it practically never gets hold upon a human body except when the body is reduced by undernourishment and lack of fresh air. Tuberculosis, therefore, is a disease of slums and jails. It is definitely and indisputably a disease of poverty. It could be wiped off the face of the earth in a single generation, and the same is true of typhus and typhoid. There's another whole host of ailments which could be wiped out by measures of public hygiene, plus education. This includes all the infant diseases and the deadly venereal diseases. But the profit system stands in the way. And so, in these closing paragraphs of this book of the body, I say that there is one disease which is the deadliest of all, and the source of all others, and that disease is poverty. I know a certain physician to the rich who is an honest and conscientious man. He said, "I loathe my work. I am wasting my time. I am called in by these fat, overfed rich people in their leisure class hotels, and what am I to say to them? Shall I say to them, 'You are living an abnormal life, and you can never be well until you cut out root and branch of all your habits of self-indulgence which are destroying you'? But no, I can't say that. Not one time in 1,000. I am expected to be polite and serious, and to listen to them while they tell me their long, tiresome story of their symptoms, and I have to encourage them and give them some temporary device that will remove some of the symptoms of their trouble. And what should one say to this honest physician? Should one tell him to go and be a physician to the poor? Would he be any happier there? He could tell the poor the causes of their diseases, and they would listen patiently. They are trained to listen and to accept what they are told. Here is a girl living in an inside bedroom in a tenement and working 10 or 11 hours a day in an unventilated factory, and she is ill with tuberculosis. The physician tells her that she needs plenty of fresh air and rest and a lot of eggs and milk in her diet. He tells her that, and he knows that she has as much chance of carrying out his orders as of flying to the moon. Or maybe he comes upon a typhoid epidemic and discovers, as happened to a friend of mine in Chicago, that there is defective plumbing in some houses owned by the political leader of the district. Or maybe it is a case of venereal disease in a young man who is drafted into the army and turned loose amid the joys of Paris. Maybe it is just a commonplace, everyday story of a room full of school children, 22% of them undernourished, as is the case in New York City, and the parents out of work part of the time, and with no possibility in their lives of ever earning enough to feed the children properly. When you confront these universal facts of our present social order, you realize that the problem of disease is not merely a problem of the body, but is a problem of the mind as well, a problem of politics and religion and philosophy, of the whole way of thinking of the so-called civilized world. A book of health which did not point out these facts would be, not a book of health, but a book of sham. But meantime, while we are trying to change the world's ideas, we have to live. And we can do our work better if we keep as well as possible. I have tried to point out the way. It is, as you can see, a matter in part of the body and in part of the mind. All the bodily regime here laid out has its basis in mental habits. All wise and wholesome ways of life can, at the age when our minds are plastic, be made into second nature. Things which we do automatically, without effort or temptation to do otherwise. This is the real secret of true happiness in the conduct of our personal lives: to acquire self-control, to rule our desires and our passions, not harshly and spasmodically, but serenely, as one drives a car which he thoroughly understands. It is in vain that we preach freedom to men who have not this self-mastery. As the poet tells us, the sensual and the dark rebel in vain, slaves of their own compulsion. And of all the personal possessions which man can attain on this earth, the most precious is the one of a sound mind controlling a sound body. I close this book by quoting some verses written by Sir Henry Wotton 300 years ago, which I have all my life considered one of the noblest pieces of poetry in our heritage. The character of a happy life. How happy is he born and taught that serveth not another's will, whose armor is his honest thought, and simple truth his utmost skill, whose passions not his masters are, whose soul is still prepared for death, not tied unto the world with care of public fame or private breath, who envies none that chance doth raise, or vice who never understood how deepest wounds are given by praise, nor rules of state, but rules of good, who hath his life from rumors freed, whose conscience is his strong retreat, whose state can neither flatterers feed, nor ruin make accusers great, who God doth late and early pray more of his grace than gifts to lend, and entertains the harmless day with a well-chosen book or friend. This man is freed from servile bands of hope to rise or fear to fall, lord of himself, though not of lands, and having nothing, yet hath all. End of chapter 27. End of book 2, the book of the body.